My husband's stepsister looked me up and down, sneered, and dropped $100 bill onto my designer duffel bag. She told me I did not belong on their elite family yacht trip, that she had crossed my name off the guest list and replaced me with her blonde yoga instructor. When I looked at my husband for defense, he simply adjusted his sunglasses and told me to take an Uber home. They all turned their backs on me, ready to sail away. What they did not know was that the captain walking down the dock was not coming to escort me away. He was coming to greet the true owner of the $15 million vessel they were standing on. Me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic in-laws who severely underestimated your worth. I am Jada, 35 years old, and until that blistering afternoon at the Miami Marina, I actually believed my marriage was a partnership. I arrived at the docks feeling exhausted but excited. I had spent the last 3 weeks closing a major corporate acquisition, working 18-hour days, just so I could clear my schedule for my in-laws' 40th anniversary cruise. I pulled my duffel bag down the wooden boardwalk, the saltwater breeze offering a brief moment of peace. That peace shattered the second I reached the gangway of the Majestic Pearl. Sloane, my husband's white stepsister, stepped directly into my path. She wore an oversized sun hat and a smug expression that I had endured for the last 6 years. She held up her hand, stopping me from taking another step. Then she reached into her woven beach tote, pulled out a crumpled $100 bill, and dropped it right onto my bag. "You do not belong on this trip," Jada Sloane announced, her voice deliberately loud enough for the marina valets and nearby restaurant patrons to hear. "I crossed your name off the manifest this morning." I stared at the money, then at her. I asked her what she was talking about. This was a family trip, one that I had flown 3 hours to attend. Sloane gestured toward the lower deck of the yacht. "Piper fits the demographic of the elite investors we are hosting today. You simply do not." I followed her gaze. Lounging on the plush white seating of the yacht was Piper Sloane's personal yoga instructor, sipping a mimosa and giggling at something my husband Devin was saying. My chest tightened. I looked directly at Devin. He was an African-American man who had always prided himself on his image, standing near the railing, wearing the linen shirt I had bought him for his birthday. I waited for him to walk down the ramp to tell his stepsister she was completely out of line to defend his wife. Instead, he avoided my eyes. He adjusted his expensive sunglasses, sighed heavily, and walked to the top of the ramp, looking down at me with pure irritation. "Just let Sloane have this one, Jada," he muttered, shifting his weight. "She planned the trip. She curated the guest list. Just take an Uber back to the hotel. I will make it up to you when we get back." I stood frozen on the concrete. My own husband was telling me to leave a family anniversary trip so his stepsister could play pretend with her yoga instructor. Before I could even formulate a response, Devin's mother, Corinne, stepped out from the air-conditioned lounge. Corinne leaned over the railing, glaring down at me, as if I were a stain on the pristine white fiberglass. "Do not cause a scene and make us look bad in front of real money, Jada," she snapped. "You have always been so loud and combative. Just take the hint and leave." I kept my voice low, dangerously calm. "I flew 3 hours for this trip, Corinne. I am your son's wife. I am not taking an Uber anywhere." Sloane let out a sharp, condescending laugh. "Do not act like you are some high roller, Jada. We all know you run a little boat booking app. Our family is trying to mingle with actual wealth today. You are just going to embarrass us." Devin chimed in, puffing out his chest, completely unaware of the grave he was digging for himself. "Exactly. Just like when Mom and Dad had to pay off my Porsche last year because your little startup could not cover our rent. Know your place, Jada. Do not ruin our networking opportunities." I stared at Devin. I did not correct him. I did not mention that my little startup had paid for that Porsche in pure cash. I had let him claim it was his corporate bonus because he felt emasculated when I started out earning him. I had allowed him to play the provider to protect his fragile ego in front of his wealthy step-family. And this was my repayment. Public humiliation on a Miami dock. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply picked up my bag, stepped right into the center of the boarding ramp, and pulled out my phone, assuming my silence meant defeat. Sloane smirked and turned to the marina valets standing nearby. "You, she barked, snapping her manicured fingers. "Carry our bags aboard. We are ready to cast off." But the valets did not move. Instead, the yacht's lead concierge stepped out onto the ramp. His name was Jamal, an impeccably dressed African-American man who moved with absolute military precision. Sloane rolled her eyes and snapped her fingers at him. Finally, she huffed. "Get this woman off our ramp so we can leave. We paid $15,000 for this VIP charter, and I will not let her ruin it." Jamal did not look at Sloane. He stood firmly at the top of the ramp holding a secure biometric tablet. He spoke with perfect, unwavering professional courtesy. "I apologize, ma'am. I cannot allow anyone to board this vessel at this time. The final manifest for this luxury tier requires the owner's direct biometric approval. We are waiting on the owner." Sloane crossed her arms, her face turning red with indignation. "I rented this yacht. We paid the fee. We are elite clients. Get your captain out here right now, or I will have you fired and blacklisted from Miami." Devin panicked, clearly afraid they were going to lose their luxury trip in front of Piper. He jogged down the ramp, pulling his wallet from his pocket. He attempted to shove a stack of crisp bills into Jamal's hands, a desperate bribe to bypass the protocol and save face. "Come on, man," Devin pleaded, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Just let us on. Do not make this a thing." While Devin was trying to intimidate my employee, Piper walked down to the ramp complaining about the wireless internet. She handed her phone to Devin, asking him to fix the connection. As he took it, the screen lit up brightly with a text message notification from his own number. It read, "Babe, did you get rid of her yet?" I saw the text clearly. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Piper was not just Sloane's yoga instructor. She was Devin's mistress. They had planned this together. I looked Devin dead in the eye and asked him exactly how long he had been sleeping with the yoga instructor. Devin paled, stepping back, but Corinne actually defended him from the upper deck. "A man has needs when his wife is always on her laptop," she declared without an ounce of shame. "You brought this on yourself, Jada." Jamal stepped back, refusing Devin's bribe money without breaking eye contact. "I only take orders from the owner, sir. Your payment does not override maritime protocol." Just then, heavy footsteps echoed on the teak deck above us. The imposing figure of Captain Sterling descended from the bridge, his white uniform pristine. Sloane immediately shifted her attitude, plastering on a fake smile as she pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me. "Captain," she called out, "your concierge is being difficult. We are your VIP guests today. Please remove this woman from the dock and let us on our boat." Captain Sterling walked steadily down the ramp. He did not look at Sloane. He did not look at Corinne. He walked straight past my husband, brushing by Devin's outstretched hand as if he were completely invisible. The tension on the dock was suffocating. Diners at the nearby seafood restaurant had stopped eating to watch the spectacle unfold. My mother-in-law gripped the railing, her knuckles white. Captain Sterling stopped directly in front of me. He stood tall, offered a deep, respectful nod, and spoke loudly enough for everyone on the pier to hear. "Welcome aboard, owner. Shall I have security remove these unauthorized guests from your private dock?" My husband's white stepsister looked me up and down with pure disgust, sneered and dropped a crumpled $100 bill onto my designer bag. She told me I did not belong on their elite family yacht trip, that she had crossed my name off the guest list and replaced me with her blonde yoga instructor. When I looked at my husband for defense, he simply stared at the concrete dock and told me to take an Uber home. They all turned their backs on me, ready to sail away. What they did not know was that the captain walking down the dock was not coming to escort me away. He was coming to greet the true owner of the $15 million vessel they were trying to board. Me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic in-laws who severely underestimated your worth. I stood frozen on this concrete dock, staring at the man I had vowed to spend the rest of my life with. My own husband Devin was telling me to leave a family anniversary trip so his white stepsister Sloane could play pretend with her yoga instructor. Before I could even formulate a response to his blatant betrayal, the heavy glass door of the yacht's air-conditioned lounge slid open. Devin's mother Corinne stepped out onto the upper deck. She gripped the polished teak railing, and looked down at me with an expression of absolute contempt. Instead of reprimanding Sloane for treating her daughter-in-law like garbage, Corinne directed all of her venom straight at me. Do not cause a scene and make us look bad in front of real money. Jada. She snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the humid Miami air. You have always been so loud and combative. Just take the hint and leave. I looked up at the woman I had spent the last 6 years trying to please. Corinne was an African-American woman who had married into a white family with old money when Devin was a teenager. Ever since then, she had adopted their elitist mindset, completely erasing her own humble beginnings to fit into Sloane's father's wealthy world. She wore a pristine white resort dress and an oversized pearl necklace, looking down on me as if I were a stain on the dock. Her words stung, but they were not new. This was exactly how she had always treated me. Corinne did not stop there. Seeing that several marina valets and wealthy patrons from the nearby seafood restaurant were beginning to watch our exchange, she decided to humiliate me publicly. She leaned further over the railing, her eyes flashing with a cruel kind of satisfaction. We all know you only married Devin for stability, Corinne announced, projecting her voice so everyone on the pier could hear. You came from absolutely nothing. You should be grateful we even let you into our exclusive circle. Now go home before you ruin our networking opportunities today. The sheer audacity of her statement took my breath away. Married Devin for stability. The absolute irony of those words almost made me laugh out loud. I thought back to the countless times I had quietly transferred money into Devin's checking account so his cards would not decline when he took Corinne out for extravagant Mother's Day brunches. I thought about how I had paid for the tailored suits he wore to his job interviews. Interviews for jobs he either never landed or could not keep for more than a few months. I was the financial stability in this marriage, but Corinne had crafted a completely different narrative to protect her precious son's image. To her and her stepdaughter Sloane, I was just the charity case, the poor girl who got lucky. They needed to believe that narrative because the alternative, that a self-made African-American woman like me was actually funding their entire lavish lifestyle, was too much for their fragile egos to handle. Devin shifted uncomfortably on the boarding ramp, looking anywhere but at me. Mom, keep your voice down, he muttered, trying to placate her while simultaneously avoiding my gaze. People are staring. Let them stare, Corinne shot back, tossing her hair over her shoulder. It is time Jada learned how the real world operates. This is a highly exclusive vessel, and Sloane went out of her way to curate a guest list of high net worth individuals. People who can actually further Devin's career. We simply cannot have you pacing around the deck looking miserable and acting difficult. Sloane nodded enthusiastically, adjusting her oversized sunglasses. Exactly. Piper brings a vibrant energy to the group. She gestured toward the blonde yoga instructor who was currently leaning against the yacht's lower railing, sipping a mimosa and watching the drama unfold with a highly entertained smirk. Piper actually understands luxury, Sloane continued. She knows how to mingle with investors. You always just sit in the corner on your laptop acting like you are better than everyone else. My chest tightened as the layers of their disrespect washed over me. For years I had endured their relentless microaggressions. The backhanded compliments about my clothes. The way Corinne would introduce me to her country club friends as Devin's little project. I had swallowed my pride time and time again because Devin begged me to keep the peace. He would hold my hand under the dinner table and whisper that they just needed time to adjust to me. He promised that once we built our own life, they would finally respect me. But looking at him now, standing on that gangway, and letting his mother and stepsister verbally assault me in front of strangers, I realized the harsh truth. Devin was never going to protect me. He enjoyed the power dynamic just as much as they did. He liked playing the wealthy provider in front of them, even though we both knew it was a complete lie. He had been unemployed for 8 months, and I was the one keeping a roof over his head. Piper let out a soft giggle from the deck, taking another sip of her champagne. Well, this is certainly dramatic, she chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Maybe Devin is right, Jada. You look really stressed out. A day at the hotel might be good for your aura. I felt a cold, calculating calm wash over me. The anger that had been boiling in my stomach suddenly crystallized into pure focus. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not give them the loud, combative reaction they were so desperately trying to provoke. I simply stood my ground on the concrete dock, planting my feet firmly against the wooden planks. I flew 3 hours for this trip, Corinne. I said, my voice low but carrying an undeniable weight. I packed my bags, arranged my schedule, and came here to celebrate your anniversary. I am your son's wife. I am not taking an Uber anywhere. Corinne's face contorted in outrage. Excuse me, she demanded, gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Did you just talk back to me? I am not talking back, I am stating a fact. I replied smoothly, keeping my posture entirely relaxed. I am not leaving this marina. Devin finally stepped down the ramp, closing the distance between us. He grabbed my arm aggressively, his fingers digging into my skin. Jada, stop it! He hissed, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You are embarrassing me in front of Piper and the marina staff. Just walk away and I will buy you that designer purse you wanted when I get back. Do not ruin this for me. I looked down at his hand gripping my arm. Then I looked up into his eyes, letting him see the absolute lack of emotion I felt for him in that moment. I snatched my arm back out of his grasp with a sharp, precise movement. The physical boundary was set, and I saw a flicker of genuine fear cross Devin's face. I am not a child. You can bribe with a purse, Devin, I told him softly, so only he could hear. And I am not a problem. You can just sweep off the dock because your stepsister decided I do not fit her aesthetic. Sloane scoffed loudly, stepping forward to stand next to Devin. She crossed her arms, her designer bracelets clinking together. You are acting completely unhinged, Jada. This is exactly why I crossed your name off the list. You have zero class. Corinne leaned over the upper deck again, her voice dripping with venom. This conversation is over. We have an itinerary to keep, and we are already running late because of your tantrum. Sloane, tell the valets to load the bags. We are casting off without her. They thought they had won. They thought they held all the power because they believed the lies Devin had been feeding them for years. They actually believed they were the elite ones standing on a vessel they thought they were renting from some faceless corporation. They had no idea that the very ground they were trying to stand on, the $15 million yacht they were so desperate to board, belonged entirely to me. My silence was not defeat. It was the calm before the storm. I just watched them carefully, waiting for the perfect moment to let the reality of their situation crash down around them. Sloane broke the heavy silence with a sharp, grating laugh that echoed off the hulls of the docked vessels. She adjusted her oversized designer sunglasses and looked at me as if I were a piece of trash that had somehow washed up on her pristine dock. Do not act like you are some high roller, Jada Sloane, sneered, her voice dripping with absolute condescension. You run a little boat booking app. You sit behind a computer all day, matching tourists with fishing dinghies. Our family is trying to mingle with actual wealth today. We are hosting elite investors who expect a certain caliber of company. You just do not fit the demographic. From the lower deck, Piper swirled her mimosa and let out a soft, mocking chuckle. The sound drifted over the gentle lapping of the harbor waves, fueling the humiliation my husband was allowing his family to inflict upon me. Devin puffed out his chest, clearly desperate to look like a powerful man in front of his new blonde distraction. He took a step forward, towering over me with unearned arrogance. Exactly, Devin chimed in, his tone thick with disrespect. You need a reality check, Jada. Just like when Mom and Dad had to pay off my Porsche last year because your little startup was failing and could not even cover our rent. Know your place and stop embarrassing me. I stared at the man I had loved and supported for 6 long years. The sheer magnitude of his lie was almost physically sickening. The midday Miami sun beat down on my shoulders, but my blood ran ice cold. My mind flashed back to the day that sleek black Porsche was purchased. Devin had just been fired from yet another mid-level management job. He was deeply depressed, sitting on our living room couch for weeks, complaining bitterly that he felt emasculated because my company was taking off while his career was completely stalling. I had wanted to lift his spirits. I had wanted to be the supportive, loving wife. So I transferred the funds directly from my corporate account. I paid for that $100,000 car in pure cash. When his mother Corinne had visited the following week and demanded to know how he could afford such a luxury vehicle while unemployed, Devin panicked. He lied right to her face. He told her he had received a massive corporate signing bonus from a phantom consulting gig. I stood right next to him and let him lie. I swallowed my pride and let him play the role of the wealthy provider because I loved him and wanted to protect his fragile ego. I allowed his toxic family to believe he was the primary breadwinner, while I quietly funded every extravagant dinner, every designer suit, and every luxury vacation they enjoyed. And now he was using my silent sacrifice as a weapon to humiliate me. He was standing on a concrete dock in the sweltering heat, looking down his nose at me in front of his mistress and his stepsister, claiming his parents had bailed us out. His parents, who had recently remortgaged their own house twice just to keep up appearances in their gated community. They were practically drowning in debt, relying on credit cards to buy their groceries, and my quiet financial support was the only thing keeping them afloat. I looked at Sloane standing there in her expensive resort wear that Devin had bought her for her birthday, using my supplementary credit card. I looked at Corinne, who was literally wearing the diamond earrings I had gifted her for Christmas, glaring at me from the upper deck. They were parasites feeding off my success while simultaneously trying to crush my spirit. I felt a profound, chilling shift inside my chest. The final lingering thread of affection I held for my husband snapped cleanly in two, leaving behind nothing but a cold, calculated resolve. The woman who had contorted herself to fit into their elitist boxes was gone. The wife who had diminished her own light so her husband could shine was dead. I realized in that exact moment that being the family scapegoat was never about my lack of value. It was entirely about their deep-seated intimidation regarding my potential. They needed me to feel small so they could feel big. I did not scream at him. I did not cry or beg for basic human decency. I did not even bother correcting his ridiculous lie about the Porsche. Arguing with a fool only proves there are two fools in the conversation. I simply reached into the pocket of my linen trousers and pulled out my phone. I unlocked the screen and opened my secure administrative application, the encrypted software that controlled my entire marine fleet. I tapped the screen once, bypassing the standard guest interface, and navigated directly to the master override settings. Let them enjoy their delusions of grandeur for a few more minutes, I thought to myself. The fall from grace was going to be absolutely spectacular. Assuming my complete silence meant I had finally accepted defeat. Sloane smirked triumphantly. She turned her back to me and snapped her manicured fingers at the marina valets standing nearby. You, she barked, treating the hardworking staff like her personal servants. Carry our bags aboard right now. We are ready to cast off. Devin visibly relaxed his shoulders, dropping as he shot Piper a reassuring smile. He clearly thought he had won. He thought he had successfully bullied his wife into submission, securing a romantic week-long getaway on a luxury yacht with his mistress, all funded by the heavy family discount I had arranged for him. He thought I was going to turn around, walk back to the parking lot, and disappear quietly into the background like I always did. But the valets did not move to pick up Sloane's designer luggage. They remained perfectly still, their eyes darting past Sloane to the top of the wooden gangway. I slowly looked up from my phone, my thumb hovering over the master control button, as the heavy teak doors of the yacht's main deck swung open. The heavy teak doors of the main deck swung open, but it was not the captain who stepped out just yet. It was one of the junior deckhands simply securing a mooring line. The valets on the dock remained frozen, sensing the mounting tension. I did not step aside to let Sloane pass. Instead, I calmly took 2 steps forward, planting myself directly in the center of the wooden boarding ramp. I blocked the entire gangway. Sloane stopped dead in her tracks. Her smug smile vanished, replaced by a deep, ugly scowl. She demanded to know what I thought I was doing. She told me to move out of the way before she called marina security to have me physically dragged off the dock. She reminded me again that this was a private luxury charter, and that trespassers would be arrested. I looked her up and down, completely unfazed by her empty threats. Call them, I challenged her smoothly. Call marina security right now, Sloane. Let us see who they actually escort off this property. Corinne gasped from the upper deck. The commotion had finally drawn the undivided attention of the wealthy patrons dining on the patio of the adjacent luxury seafood restaurant. People were putting down their champagne flutes and pointing in our direction. Corinne hated nothing more than looking unpolished in public. She leaned over the railing and hissed at Devin, ordering him to handle his wife before I ruined their entire social standing in Miami. Devin scrambled down the remaining few steps of the dock. His face was flushed with embarrassment and anger. He reached out and grabbed my upper arm aggressively, his fingers digging into my skin just hard enough to hurt. He pulled me toward him, his breath hot against my face as he whispered through gritted teeth. He told me I was acting completely unhinged. He said I was humiliating him in front of Piper and the entire marina, and that if I did not walk away to an Uber right this second, he would pack his bags and leave me the moment he got back from the trip. I thought the threat of abandonment would break me. He thought the idea of losing him would force me back into submission. But he did not realize that the woman who had spent 6 years terrified of losing his love had died the moment he lied about paying off his Porsche. I looked down at his hand gripping my arm. Then I looked straight into his panicked eyes. I snatched my arm back with a sharp, violent motion that made him stumble backward. The physical boundary was set. I told him never to lay a hand on me again. I told him that his threats meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. Devin stood there looking completely helpless. He was a man who relied entirely on my money to feel powerful, and without my compliance, he was nothing but a hollow shell wearing a suit I bought him. Just as Devin was trying to recover his bruised ego, Piper, the blonde yoga instructor, decided to insert herself into the drama. She walked down the gangway, her heels clicking softly against the wood. She pouted, holding out her sleek smartphone toward Devin. She complained that the marina's wireless internet was spotty and asked Devin if he could connect her phone to his personal hotspot so she could upload her boarding photos. Devin, desperate to regain his alpha male persona in front of his new audience, eagerly took her phone. He puffed out his chest and told her it was no problem at all, that he would handle it for her. But as Devin held Piper's phone, the screen lit up brightly with a new text message notification. Because I was standing mere inches away from him, I had a clear, unobstructed view of the screen. The message was from a contact saved simply with a red heart emoji. But the phone number displayed beneath it was one I knew by heart. It was Devin's private cell phone number. The text message read, "Babe, did you get rid of her yet?" Time seemed to stop. The ambient noise of the harbor, the seagulls, the clinking of silverware from the restaurant, it all faded into pure static. I stared at the glowing screen. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening clarity. Piper was not just Sloane's yoga instructor. She was not just some random attractive guest brought along to mingle with investors. Piper was Devin's mistress. Sloane had not just crossed my name off the manifest to be cruel. She had actively conspired with my husband to replace me with his mistress on a luxury vacation that I had heavily subsidized. Corinne knew. Sloane knew. They had all orchestrated this profound betrayal right under my nose, and they were planning to laugh about it while sailing the Caribbean on my dime. I felt a bizarre sense of calm wash over my entire body. It was the absolute absence of grief. I looked at Piper, who was suddenly looking very nervous as she realized I was staring at her phone screen. Then I looked at Devin. I asked him, my voice completely devoid of emotion, exactly how long he had been sleeping with the yoga instructor. Devin froze. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly in the bright Florida sun. He dropped Piper's phone as if it had burned him, the device clattering onto the wooden planks of the dock. He started stammering, waving his hands in the air, trying to form a coherent sentence. He claimed it was a misunderstanding, that it was not what it looked like, that he and Piper were just friends consulting on a wellness app. It was pathetic. The lies were so weak, so flimsy, that even Sloane looked embarrassed for him. But instead of showing an ounce of remorse, Devin quickly went on the defensive. He cornered like a frightened animal. He raised his voice, pointing a finger at me, blaming me for his infidelity. He shouted that I was always obsessed with my work. He claimed I was emotionally unavailable, always glued to my laptop, and that I made him feel like a burden instead of a husband. And then, right on cue, Corinne decided to defend her cheating son from the upper deck. She leaned over the railing, her face twisted with self-righteousness. She announced loudly that a man has needs when his wife neglects her domestic duties. She actually told me that I had brought this betrayal upon myself by being too ambitious and forgetting how to be a proper submissive wife to her son. I stood there and absorbed their toxic excuses. They were blaming my success for his lack of loyalty. They were weaponizing my hard work, the very hard work that paid for the shoes on his feet and the roof over his mother's head to justify his affair. I looked at Sloane, who was now tapping her foot impatiently. She crossed her arms and demanded that we wrap up this domestic dispute immediately. She declared that they had paid $15,000 for this VIP charter, and she was not going to let my marital problems delay their departure any longer. She yelled for marina security again, demanding that they remove the embarrassing obstacle from her path. I slowly checked my watch. I did not argue with Corinna's justification of her son's cheating. I did not correct Sloane's valuation of the boat. I simply waited. Because right at that moment, the heavy teak doors on the main deck finally swung wide open. Jamal, the lead concierge of my luxury fleet, stepped out into the sunlight. He looked impeccable in his crisp navy uniform. He walked with a quiet authority that instantly commanded the attention of everyone on the dock. Sloane let out an exasperated sigh of relief. She snapped her fingers at Jamal and ordered him to get me off the ramp so they could finally board their vessel. But Jamal did not look at Sloane. He did not look at Devon. He walked right past the angry white stepsister, stopped at the top of the ramp, and stood firmly with his hands clasped behind his back, holding his secure biometric tablet. Jamal stood firmly at the top of the ramp, holding his secure biometric tablet. He looked down at the angry group gathered on the concrete with an expression of unreadable professional courtesy. He tapped the screen of his tablet and looked directly at Sloane. "I apologize, ma'am," he said, his voice projecting clearly over the harbor breeze. "I cannot allow anyone to board this specific vessel at this time." Sloane let out a sharp gasp of disbelief. She took a step forward, her face turning a deep shade of crimson. "What do you mean you cannot allow us to board?" she demanded, her voice cracking with indignation. "We are the VIP clients for today. We have a reservation." Jamal did not flinch. He did not step back. He simply held the tablet in front of him. "The final manifest for this luxury tier requires the owner's direct biometric approval," he explained calmly. "We are waiting on the owner to authorize your boarding." Corinne nearly lost her mind. She leaned over the upper deck railing so far I thought she might tumble right over. She pointed a trembling finger at Jamal. "Do you have any idea who we are?" she screeched, losing every ounce of the polished country club persona she had spent decades cultivating. "We paid $15,000 for this family anniversary charter. We are elite guests. You get the captain out here right now, or I promise you, I will have you fired and blacklisted from every marina in Miami." Devon realized that his entire facade was crumbling in front of his mistress. Piper was standing on the lower deck, looking increasingly annoyed by the delay. Devon panicked. He reached into the pocket of his tailored linen trousers and pulled out his designer money clip. He yanked out a thick stack of $100 bills. It was the cash I had given him just yesterday to cover the expenses he claimed he needed for the trip. He jogged up to the base of the ramp, looking up at Jamal with desperate eyes. "Come on, man," Devon pleaded, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. He tried to shove the wad of cash into Jamal's hands. "Just take this and let us on. Do not make a huge deal out of this. I am trying to show my family a good time and you are embarrassing me. I watched my husband try to bribe my own employee with my own money. The absolute pathetic nature of his actions washed over me." Jamal looked down at the money and then slowly brought his eyes up to meet Devon's. He took a deliberate step back, refusing the bribe completely. "I only take orders from the owner, sir," Jamal stated, his voice carrying a quiet but absolute authority. "Your payment does not override maritime protocol. We will wait for the owner." Sloane let out a scream of pure frustration. She stomped her foot on the dock like a petulant toddler who had just been told no for the first time in her privileged life. She pulled out her phone, threatening to call the corporate office of Oceanic Elite Charters to have everyone on the dock fired immediately. Before she could dial a single number, the heavy thud of measured footsteps echoed on the teak deck above us. The imposing figure of Captain Sterling descended the stairs from the bridge. He was a tall, distinguished man with silver hair at his temples, wearing a pristine white uniform with gold epaulettes gleaming in the Florida sun. Sloane's eyes lit up with malicious glee. She immediately shifted her attitude, plastering on a fake, sickly sweet smile as she looked up at the captain. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger straight at me. "Captain," she called out, playing the role of the victimized wealthy patron. Thank goodness you are here. Your concierge is being incredibly difficult, and this crazy woman is blocking the ramp. We are your VIP guests today. Please have security remove this woman from the dock immediately so we can get on our boat. Captain Sterling walked steadily down the ramp. His face was carved from stone. He did not acknowledge Sloane's frantic demands. He did not look up at Corinne, who was still huffing indignantly over the railing. He walked straight past my husband, brushing by Devon's outstretched hand, as if he were nothing more than a ghost on the pier. The tension on the dock was suffocating. Diners at the nearby seafood restaurant had completely abandoned their meals. Waiters were standing frozen, holding trays of food, just watching the spectacle unfold. My mother-in-law gripped the railing, her knuckles white, waiting for the captain to validate their supposed elite status and throw me out onto the street. Captain Sterling stopped directly in front of me. He stood tall, offered a deep, respectful bow, and spoke with a booming voice that echoed across the entire marina. "Welcome aboard, owner," he announced. "Shall I have security remove these unauthorized guests from your private dock?" The world seemed to stop spinning. The dock went completely dead silent. The only sound was the gentle crashing of the waves against the hulls of the ships. Then a sharp, shattering sound broke the quiet. Piper had dropped her crystal champagne flute on the lower deck, the glass exploding into 100 pieces across the polished fiberglass. Sloane's jaw literally dropped open. She stared at the captain and then at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of profound confusion and rising terror. Corinne's mouth opened and closed without any sound coming out, looking exactly like a fish suffocating on dry land. Devon stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own expensive shoes. His voice cracked as he stammered out a response. "What are you talking about?" He squeaked, his gaze darting frantically between Captain Sterling and me. "What do you mean, owner? She books small fishing trips. She is just a customer service rep." I slowly placed my phone back into my pocket. The time for silence was over. I stepped forward, pressing my thumb to Jamal's tablet. A green light flashed, confirming my identity. I closed the distance between myself and the man who had just spent the last 20 minutes participating in my public humiliation. I looked directly into Devon's terrified eyes, my voice laced with a lethal, unapologetic professionalism. "My little startup is Oceanic Elite Charters." I told him, the words cutting through the humid air like a blade. "I own this $15 million vessel, and I own the 6 other luxury yachts currently docked in this marina." I turned my gaze upward, locking eyes with my cruel mother-in-law. "The $15,000 you paid was a 90% friends and family discount," I quietly authorized out of respect for my marriage. "I wanted to do something nice for your anniversary. The actual full charter price for this vessel is $150,000 for the week." Corinne staggered back from the railing, pressing a hand to her chest, as if I had physically struck her. The blood drained entirely from her face. She suddenly realized that the woman she had spent the last 6 years treating like a charity case was actually the wealthiest person she had ever known. Sloane started shaking her head violently in denial. "No," she muttered, stepping backward. "No, that is impossible. You do not have that kind of money. You wear off-the-rack clothes." I turned my attention back to Devon, making sure every single person on that dock heard my next words. "And since we are airing out financial truths on the pier today, let us talk about your Portia, Devon." Devon's eyes widened in absolute horror. He reached out a trembling hand, silently begging me to stop, to let him keep his final shred of dignity. But he had shown me no mercy, and I was entirely fresh out of grace. I pulled up my corporate banking application on my phone and held the screen up high so everyone could see the glowing numbers. "Devon has not had a job in 8 months, I announced, my voice steady and unwavering. "He was fired for gross incompetence. My corporate account paid off his sports car in pure cash. I have been funding your son's entire lavish lifestyle while you look down your nose at me, Corinne." The surrounding marina guests began whispering and pointing at them. The fake rich family had been thoroughly unmasked. Devon tried to shrink into himself, completely humiliated, as the reality of his pathetic existence was laid bare in front of his mother, his stepsister, and the mistress he had brought along to impress. But I was not finished. I looked past Devon and focused my gaze on Piper, who was currently trying to quietly inch her way toward the exit ramp of the lower deck. I also know about the yoga studio rent. Devon has been paying for you, Piper. Piper, I called out, watching her freeze in her tracks. I turned back to my husband. I had my chief financial officer run an audit on your supplementary credit card last night. You used my hard-earned money, my company's money, to fund your mistress. That is corporate embezzlement, Devon. My legal team has already drafted the paperwork to have you formally charged. The arrogant, toxic family that had stood so tall just moments before suddenly crumbled. The shift in power was absolute. Corinne abandoned her elitist persona instantly. She practically scrambled down the stairs from the upper deck, tears welling in her eyes. She rushed onto the ramp, holding her hands out toward me. "Jada, sweetheart," she pleaded, her voice trembling with manufactured affection. "This is all a huge misunderstanding. We are family. You know we love you. We were just stressed about the trip. Please do not do this." Sloane chimed in, her arrogance entirely replaced by desperation. She begged me not to cancel the charter, claiming she had already posted the itinerary to her 50,000 social media followers and had luxury brand deals riding on the content. She actually asked me to look past my husband's infidelity just so she could get her free vacation. I stepped back from Corinne's grasping hands. "Do not touch me," I commanded. "Your apologies are not for treating me poorly. Your apologies are for realizing you are broke and I am the bank." I unzipped my designer duffel bag, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and slapped it firmly against Devon's chest. "These are divorce papers," I told him, as he stared down at the envelope in shock. "My lawyers froze our joint accounts an hour ago." I turned to Captain Sterling. "Cancel the family discount. If they wish to board, they can pay the remaining $135,000 balance right now." I looked at the three of them standing paralyzed on the wooden ramp. "You have exactly 60 seconds to get off my private dock before I have the harbor police arrest you for trespassing." Piper did not hesitate. She dropped her beach tote, turned on her heel, and sprinted off the lower deck, running as fast as her platform sandals would carry her toward the parking lot, abandoning Devon to save herself. I walked up the gangway, my head held high. Jamal and Captain Sterling pulled up the ramp immediately behind me, severing the connection to the dock. I stood on the aft deck, picking up a fresh glass of champagne. As the yacht's massive engines roared to life, I looked down at my ex-husband, my cruel mother-in-law, and my entitled stepsister-in-law, screaming and blaming each other on the concrete dock. They were tearing each other apart as I sailed into the brilliant blue waters of the Atlantic. I realized then that being the family scapegoat was never about my lack of value. It was their reaction to my quiet power. I am no longer shrinking to make toxic people comfortable in my presence. I protected my peace, and in return I gained the world. The sheer audacity of my mother-in-law, defending her sons, blatant infidelity, hung heavily in the thick Miami air. I stood on the concrete dock, listening to Corinne justify Devon's cheating by claiming that a man has needs when his wife neglects her domestic duties. She actually weaponized my success, the very success that kept her own lights on, to excuse the fact that her son was sleeping with his stepsister's yoga instructor. Devon stood behind his mother, looking visibly relieved. He did not have the spine to defend his own actions, so he cowardly let his mother tear me down instead. Piper stood on the lower deck, running a hand through her blonde hair, looking entirely too pleased with herself. Corinne was not finished. Having justified the affair in her own twisted mind, she decided it was time to completely annihilate my self-esteem. She wanted to remind me of the hierarchy she believed existed between us. She puffed out her chest, smoothing down her expensive resort dress, and took a step closer to the railing of the upper deck. She raised her voice intentionally, making sure the wealthy patrons at the nearby seafood restaurant and the marina valets could hear every single word she said. She announced that they had paid $15,000 for this VIP charter. She dragged out the number, emphasizing the thousands, as if it were a sum of money that should make me drop to my knees in reverence. She declared that they were elite clients who demanded respect and luxury. She looked down at me with eyes full of absolute disgust and told me that I was nothing but an embarrassment to their family name. She shouted that I was ruining their highly anticipated vacation and demanded that someone call security to have me forcibly removed from the premises. Sloane eagerly joined in on the humiliation. She stepped up next to Devon, crossing her arms and letting out another one of her grating laughs. She told me that I had no idea how the real world operated. She bragged that they had curated a highly exclusive guest list for this trip, featuring real estate moguls and tech investors who expected a pristine environment free of domestic drama. She pointed at Piper and claimed that the yoga instructor possessed the kind of refined energy and class that I could never hope to achieve. She told me I was just a sad, bitter woman who spent too much time looking at spreadsheets, while the real elite members of society actually enjoyed the fruits of their wealth. Devon chimed in, his confidence completely restored, now that the two women in his family were verbally attacking me. He told me to just listen to his mother and go home. He said I was making a fool of myself standing on the dock blocking their luxury experience. He warned me that if I did not leave immediately, he would make sure our divorce left me with absolutely nothing. He threatened to take half of my tiny startup company, claiming he was entitled to it for putting up with me all these years. I listened to their relentless bragging and their pathetic threats. I did not yell back. I did not cry. I did not try to defend my character or my marriage. I simply stood my ground and slowly raised my left wrist. I glanced down at my watch. It was a custom timepiece, a reward I had purchased for myself after closing my first major corporate acquisition. I watched the second-hand sweep smoothly across the dial. I did not argue with Corona's valuation of the boat. I did not tell her that $15,000 barely covered the cost of the premium fuel required to move the massive vessel out of the harbor. I did not mention that the actual charter rate for this specific luxury yacht was $150,000 for the week. I kept my mouth completely shut because I knew that the $15,000 they had scraped together was just a fraction of the cost. It was a heavily discounted friends and family rate that I had personally authorized in the company system because Devon had begged me to help him do something nice for his parents' anniversary. They believed they were elite. They truly believed their small contribution granted them supreme authority over the vessel, the crew, and me. They were standing on the deck of my ship, drinking my champagne, breathing my air, and using my generosity to fund their delusions of grandeur. It was a spectacular illusion, one they had bought into completely. The irony was so profound it almost felt like a physical weight pressing down on the dock. I checked my watch again. I knew the operational protocols of oceanic elite charters better than anyone else because I had written them myself. I knew that the crew was currently executing their final boarding checks. I knew the chief engineer was verifying the propulsion systems, and the interior staff were conducting their final walkthrough of the staterooms. The delay was not an accident. The crew was waiting for the final clear. They were waiting for me. Corinne grew increasingly impatient with my silence. She slammed her hand against the teak railing and yelled for the marina staff again, demanding to know why they were tolerating a hostile trespasser on their private gangway. She screamed that she was going to write a scathing review of the marina and personally ensure that everyone working on the dock lost their jobs before sunset. Sloane pulled out her phone, threatening to live stream the entire altercation to her followers to expose my unhinged behavior. She held the camera up, narrating the situation, painting herself as the victim of a jealous, crazy wife who was trying to ruin a beautiful family anniversary trip. Devon just stood there, shaking his head, playing the role of the exhausted, long-suffering husband. The Florida heat continued to radiate off the concrete, but inside my mind, everything was perfectly cool and organized. I did not need to lower myself to their level of chaotic screaming. I was the owner of the chessboard, and they were just pawns who did not realize the game was already over. Suddenly, the heavy polished teak doors on the main deck of the yacht slid wide open. The loud hum of the interior air conditioning spilled out into the humid marina air. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the luxurious lounge into the bright afternoon sunlight. It was Jamal, the yacht's lead concierge. He was an impeccably dressed African-American man who carried himself with the kind of quiet, absolute dignity that money simply could not buy. His crisp navy blue uniform was flawless, not a single wrinkle or crease out of place. The gold insignia of Oceanic Elite Charters gleamed proudly on his lapel. He held a sleek, secure biometric tablet resting comfortably in the crook of his left arm. His posture was perfectly straight, his expression a mask of ultimate professional neutrality. The moment Jamal stepped onto the deck, the chaotic screaming from my in-laws came to an abrupt halt. They had finally gotten the attention of the senior staff, and they were ready to exercise their perceived power. Sloane let out a loud, exasperated sigh of relief. She dropped her phone to her side and rolled her eyes dramatically. She looked at Jamal, not as a professional, not as a human being, but as a servant who had kept her waiting entirely too long. She raised her hand and snapped her manicured fingers at him, creating a sharp, disrespectful sound that echoed across the water. Finally, Sloane barked, her voice dripping with entitled arrogance. "Where have you been? We have been waiting out here in the heat for 20 minutes while this crazy woman harasses us. Get down here right now. Get this woman off our ramp so we can leave. We are your elite clients and we are ready to cast off." Corinne nodded vigorously from the upper deck, leaning over to add her own demands. She told Jamal to call the police and have me forcibly removed. She reminded him again of the $15,000 they had paid, treating the sum as if it granted her ownership of the entire ocean. Devin crossed his arms, waiting for Jamal to do the dirty work of removing his wife so he could get back to flirting with Piper. I remained completely motionless at the base of the boarding ramp. I did not look at Sloane. I did not look at Devin. I kept my eyes locked on Jamal, waiting to see the illusion of their elite status shatter against the unyielding wall of reality. The contrast between Jamal's dignified presence and my in-law's erratic behavior was striking. Jamal represented the standard of excellence I had built my company upon. He was highly trained, highly compensated, and fiercely loyal to the brand we had created together. He knew every operational detail of the fleet, and more importantly, he knew exactly who I was. Sloane continued to snap her fingers, treating the air around her as if it were hers to command. She complained about the ice melting in her drink. She complained about the humidity ruining her hair. She demanded immediate service, citing her imaginary status as a high net worth individual. Piper watched from the lower deck, her earlier smirk slightly fading as she noticed that Jamal did not seem intimidated in the slightest by Sloane's abrasive demands. Devin tried to assert his dominance, stepping toward the bottom of the ramp and looking up at Jamal. He used his deep corporate voice, the one he reserved for trying to impress people. "Listen, man," Devin called out. "We just want to get our vacation started. My family paid good money for this experience, and my wife here is having some sort of mental breakdown. Just call security, get her out of here, and let us get on the boat. I will make sure you get a nice tip for your trouble." The utter disrespect of my husband, offering a small cash tip to a professional concierge who made a six-figure salary running the logistics of a multi-million-dollar super yacht, was laughable. Devin was offering pennies to a man who managed fortunes, all while standing in clothes that I had paid for. I felt the wood of the gangway shift slightly beneath my feet as the water moved the massive vessel. The yacht was a marvel of modern engineering, featuring a sleek white hull-tinted panoramic windows and 3 decks of pure luxury. It was my proudest achievement, the flagship of my entire enterprise. And these people, these toxic, ungrateful parasites, thought they could simply command it. I checked my watch one final time. The boarding window was officially opening. The elaborate theater production my in-laws had been putting on was about to face the final curtain call. They had flexed their non-existent wealth, they had flaunted their infidelity, they had hurled their insults, and they had exposed the very darkest corners of their character. Jamal slowly moved toward the top of the ramp. He did not rush. He did not scramble to appease the angry guests shouting at him. He moved with the deliberate, measured pace of a man who held the keys to the kingdom. He stopped right at the edge of the gangway, looking down at Sloane, Devin, and Corinne. Sloane tapped her foot, her patience completely exhausted. "I said get her off the ramp," she yelled, pointing her finger directly at my face. "Get her out of here so we can leave." The stage was perfectly set. The elite illusion they had wrapped themselves in was hovering right at the edge of a cliff, and all it was going to take was one single sentence to send it crashing down into the abyss. I took a slow, deep breath, filling my lungs with the salty ocean air, and prepared to watch my quiet power dismantle their entire world. Jamal stopped right at the edge of the gangway, looking down at the 4 people standing on the concrete dock. Sloane still had her finger pointed aggressively just inches from my face. her breathing heavy with manufactured outrage. She looked at Jamal, expecting him to immediately comply with her demands. She expected him to lunge forward, grab me by the arms, and physically drag me away from the yacht so she could begin her luxurious vacation. She had lived her entire life under the assumption that her wealth, or at least the wealth of her father, granted her the absolute right to command the bodies and actions of everyone she deemed beneath her. Jamal did not lunge. He did not even flinch. He stood firmly at the top of the ramp, his posture radiating a quiet, unshakable strength. He lowered his gaze from Sloane's face to the finger she was pointing at me. He did not say a word about it, but the sheer weight of his silent judgment made Sloane falter. She slowly lowered her hand, her perfectly manicured fingernails curling back into a tight fist against her side. I watched the muscles in Jamal's jaw tighten slightly before he smoothed his expression back into a mask of flawless hospitality. He held his secure biometric tablet in his left hand, the screen glowing brightly in the afternoon sun. He tapped the surface once, bringing up the master manifest for the vessel. Then he looked directly at Sloane, meeting her arrogant glare with eyes that had seen every type of entitled behavior the Miami Marina had to offer. "I apologize, ma'am," Jamal said, his deep voice carrying a tone of absolute finality. "I cannot allow anyone to board this specific vessel at this time." The words hung in the humid air like a physical barrier dropping between the dock and the yacht. Sloane let out a sharp, gasping breath, her mouth falling open in genuine shock. She blinked rapidly, completely unable to process the fact that a service worker had just told her no. She had expected apologies. She had expected him to grovel and scramble to appease her. She had certainly not expected to be denied entry to the very boat she had been bragging about for the last 45 minutes. "What did you just say to me?" Sloane demanded, her voice pitching upward into a shrill, grating frequency. She took a step forward, her expensive sandals slapping aggressively against the concrete. "I told you we are the VIP clients for today. My father is a highly influential man. We have a reservation, and we are already running late because of this ridiculous woman blocking the path. You are going to let us on that boat right now, or I am going to make sure you never work in the luxury hospitality industry again." Jamal did not move a single muscle. He stood like an immovable fortress, blocking the entrance to my $15 million asset. His calm demeanor was the perfect mirror to my own quiet resolve, and it was driving my in-laws absolutely insane. From the upper deck, Corinne finally lost the last remaining shred of her polished country club composure. The sophisticated persona she had spent decades perfecting completely vanished, leaving behind a frantic, insecure woman terrified of losing her social standing. She leaned so far over the polished teak railing that I thought she might actually pitch forward and tumble onto the dock. Her face was contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. "Do you have any idea who we are?" Corinne exploded, screaming at Jamal from above. "We paid $15,000 for this. We are elite guests. We are not some common tourists you can just turn away at the door. You get the captain out here right now, or I will have you fired and blacklisted from Miami before the sun goes down." I listened to Corinne scream threats at my employee, and a familiar wave of disgust washed over me. This was not the first time I had witnessed my mother-in-law treat service workers like garbage. I thought back to the countless dinners I had paid for at high-end steakhouses, where Corinne would snap her fingers at the waitstaff, send her food back 3 times, and leave a non-existent tip just to make herself feel powerful. Devin would always sit across the table quietly eating his meal, never once correcting his mother's appalling behavior. He enabled her cruelty through his silence because he was too weak to ever stand up to her. Today was no different. Instead of telling his mother to calm down or apologizing to Jamal for her outburst, Devin decided to try and play the tough guy. He puffed out his chest and marched up to the bottom of the ramp, positioning himself between me and Sloane. He looked up at Jamal, trying to use his height to intimidate the concierge. "Listen to me," Devin commanded, puffing up his chest and using his deepest, most artificial corporate tone. "You are making a huge mistake, buddy. You do not want to mess with my family. We paid for a luxury experience and you are ruining it. Now step aside and let us through before this gets ugly." It was utterly pathetic. Devin was an unemployed man wearing a linen shirt I had bought him, trying to threaten a highly trained professional while standing on a dock he had no right to be on. Jamal was easily 3 inches taller than Devin and carried twice the dignity. He looked down at my husband with an expression that bordered on profound pity. Piper, the yoga instructor, was watching the entire exchange from the lower deck, her champagne flute trembling slightly in her hand. The fun, glamorous vacation she thought she was getting was rapidly turning into a public nightmare. The patrons at the nearby seafood restaurant were no longer just casually observing, they were actively leaning over the patio railing, hanging on to every single word of the confrontation. The elite image my in-laws were so desperate to project was completely shattering in real time. Jamal remained completely stoic. He did not raise his voice to match Corinne's screaming. He did not puff out his chest to counter Devon's ridiculous posturing. He simply stood tall, anchored by the authority I had personally bestowed upon him. He looked up at Corinne, who was still panting heavily over the railing, and then looked back down at Devon and Sloane. The final manifest for this luxury tier requires the owner's direct biometric approval, Jamal stated, his voice ringing out with crystal clear precision. We are waiting on the owner. The dock went perfectly still. The sheer weight of that sentence hit my in-laws like a freight train, but not in the way they should have understood it. They were so blinded by their own arrogance, their own deep-seated prejudices, and their complete underestimation of my capabilities, that the truth did not even register in their minds. Sloane's entire demeanor shifted the moment the word owner left Jamal's lips. The anger melted away from her face, instantly replaced by a frantic calculating vanity. In her mind, the owner of a $15 million super yacht could only be one thing: an older, incredibly wealthy white billionaire. She immediately assumed that some powerful maritime tycoon was about to walk down the dock to personally welcome them aboard and kick me to the curb. Sloane quickly reached up and smoothed down her hair, adjusting her designer sunglasses to make sure she looked perfectly presentable. She shot a look at Piper, subtly motioning for the yoga instructor to strike a more flattering pose against the lower railing. They were preparing to impress the phantom billionaire they thought was coming to their rescue. Corinne also took the bait completely. She pulled herself back from the upper railing, frantically smoothing out the wrinkles in her pristine white resort dress. She cleared her throat, attempting to regain her composed country club posture. She looked down at Devon and hissed a sharp command, telling him to stand up straight and fix his collar. She wanted her son to look like a successful executive when the mysterious owner finally arrived. Devon quickly obliged, running a hand over his hair and stepping away from me to distance himself from the crazy wife causing a scene on the dock. He looked toward the parking lot of the marina, expecting a fleet of black luxury SUVs to pull up at any moment. They were all standing there, practically holding their breath, waiting for their savior to arrive. They actually believed that their $15,000 discounted payment made them important enough to warrant a personal greeting from a high-net-worth individual. They thought the owner was going to apologize for the delay, validate their elite status, and order security to drag me away in handcuffs. I watched their pathetic delusions unfold right in front of my eyes. I stood firmly in the center of the wooden gangway, feeling the warm Florida breeze sweep across my shoulders. I did not say a word. I did not ruin the beautiful anticipation building on the dock. I just kept my eyes locked on Jamal, sharing a fleeting micro-expression of absolute understanding with my lead concierge. The stage was completely set. The audience was watching. My in-laws had dug their own graves and willingly climbed inside, waiting for the gold-plated dirt to be thrown on top of them. I slowly reached into the pocket of my linen trousers, feeling the cool metal edge of my phone against my fingertips, preparing to deliver the final devastating blow that would completely obliterate their entire reality. I kept my hand casually tucked inside the pocket of my linen trousers, my fingers resting lightly against the smooth glass of my smartphone. The silence on the concrete dock was beginning to stretch into an uncomfortable, suffocating eternity. The confident, boastful energy that Sloane and Devon had been radiating just moments ago was rapidly evaporating under the punishing glare of the Miami sun. The illusion of their elite status was cracking, and the desperation was starting to bleed through the fissures. From the lower deck of the yacht, Piper let out a loud, exaggerated sigh. She shifted her weight, leaning against the polished fiberglass railing, and began fanning herself with a glossy luxury magazine she had picked up from a patio table. She loudly complained that her mimosa was getting warm and that her expensive sunscreen was starting to melt off her shoulders. She looked up at Devon with an expression of intense boredom, completely dropping the bubbly, enamored persona she had been performing earlier. She was a woman who expected a seamless luxury experience and standing idle on a hot dock, while her supposed benefactor argued with a concierge was not what she had signed up for. Devon saw his mistress slipping away. I watched the sheer panic wash over his face. His entire identity, his completely fabricated alpha male persona, was tied to his ability to provide this extravagant vacation. He had spent weeks hyping up this yacht charter, promising Piper a week of Caribbean sunsets and five-star service. Now he was standing on the dock looking like an absolute fraud. He needed to fix this immediately. He needed to prove he was the powerful man he claimed to be. Devon reached into the pocket of his tailored trousers. He pulled out a thick silver money clip. I recognized it instantly. It was the designer money clip I had bought him for our 3rd anniversary. Tucked inside was a heavy stack of crisp $100 bills. It was the exact cash I had withdrawn from the ATM just yesterday and handed to him to cover the incidental travel expenses he claimed he needed for his parents' anniversary trip. He marched up to the bottom of the wooden gangway, his chest puffed out, attempting to project an aura of casual wealth. He looked up at Jamal, who was still standing like an immovable fortress at the top of the ramp. Devon tried to play the role of the relatable wealthy businessman dealing with a minor inconvenience. "Listen, man," Devon called out, his voice dropping to a frantic conspiratorial whisper. He climbed 2 steps up the ramp, holding the wad of cash out toward Jamal. "Let us just handle this between us. I know how these things work. You have protocols, I get it. But my family is getting restless and I have guests I need to impress. Just take this and let us on the boat. Do not make a huge deal out of this. I am trying to show my family a good time and you are embarrassing me." I stood completely still, watching my unemployed husband try to bribe my own highly trained employee using my own hard-earned money. The absolute pathetic absurdity of his actions washed over me in waves. Devon was offering a few $100s to a senior maritime concierge who made a 6-figure salary running the logistical operations of a multi-million-dollar super yacht fleet. Devon was offering pennies to a man who managed fortunes, all while wearing a linen shirt that I had paid for. Jamal did not blink. He looked down at the crumpled stack of bills in Devon's outstretched hand, and then slowly brought his dark eyes up to meet Devon's panicked gaze. The contrast between the two men was glaring. Jamal radiated integrity, earned dignity, and quiet authority. Devon radiated nothing but sleaze, insecurity, and desperation. Jamal took a deliberate, measured step backward, refusing the bribe completely. He held his biometric tablet securely against his side. "I only take orders from the owner, sir," Jamal stated, his voice carrying a quiet but absolute authority that echoed across the water. "Your payment does not override maritime protocol. We will wait for the owner to authorize your boarding." Devon froze, his hands still extended in the air, holding the rejected cash. A deep, ugly flush of humiliation crept up his neck and spread across his cheeks. He had tried to buy his way out of an embarrassing situation and had been shut down with flawless professional grace. He slowly pulled his hand back, shoving the money clip deep into his pocket, and stumbled awkwardly back down the ramp to the concrete dock. Corinne watched her son's failure from the upper deck. She gripped the teak railing so tightly her knuckles turned entirely white. She could not comprehend what was happening. In her world, money always opened doors. Cash always smoothed over inconveniences. The fact that a concierge had just blatantly refused a bribe and denied them entry was shattering her entire worldview. She opened her mouth to scream another threat, but Sloane beat her to it. Sloane let out a scream of pure, unadulterated frustration. She stomped her designer sandal against the pavement like a petulant toddler who had just been denied a toy. The frantic, calculating vanity she had displayed just moments ago vanished, replaced by a vicious, entitled rage. She pulled out her smartphone, her fingers flying aggressively across the screen. "This is absolutely unacceptable," Sloane shrieked, pointing her phone at Jamal as if it were a weapon. "I am finding the corporate number for Oceanic Elite Charters right now. I am going to call the regional director. I am going to make sure they know that their staff is harassing paying VIP clients and extorting them for bribes on the dock. You are going to lose your job, and I am going to sue this entire company for emotional distress." Sloane was spiraling completely out of control. She was manufacturing a narrative of victimhood in real time, trying to spin Jamal's professional integrity into an act of malicious extortion. She genuinely believed that if she screamed loud enough and threatened enough lawsuits, the universe would simply bend. She tapped her screen furiously, pulling up the search engine, desperately trying to find a customer service hotline to call. Before she could dial a single digit, a heavy, resounding thud echoed from the upper levels of the yacht. The sound of measured, authoritative footsteps resonated against the polished teak deck above us. The heavy glass-paneled doors of the bridge swung wide open, and an imposing figure stepped out into the brilliant Florida sunlight. Captain Sterling descended the gleaming exterior staircase. He was a tall, distinguished man in his late 50s with sharp features, deep-sea blue eyes, and silver hair neatly trimmed at his temples. He wore a pristine, perfectly tailored white maritime uniform. The gold epaulets on his shoulders gleamed fiercely, marking his absolute rank and authority over the vessel. He moved with the seasoned, undeniable presence of a man who commanded the ocean. The moment Captain Sterling came into view, the entire dynamic on the dock shifted violently. Sloane stopped typing on her phone. She looked up, her eyes locking onto the gold bars on the captain's shoulders. The abrasive screaming entitled rage vanished from her face in less than a second. Sloane immediately code switched. She saw an older, distinguished white man in a position of ultimate authority, and she instantly assumed he was the savior she had been waiting for. She assumed he was the man who would validate her elite status, put the black concierge in his place, and order security to drag me off the premises. Sloane hastily shoved her phone into her woven beach tote. She ran her hands through her hair, smoothing down the flyaways, and plastered a fake, sickly sweet, highly victimized smile across her face. She stepped forward, positioning herself at the very bottom of the gangway, gazing up at the captain as if he were a knight in shining armor coming to rescue her from a dragon. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger straight at my face, her voice dripping with artificial distress. Captain Sloane called out, her tone dramatically softening into a pleading, helpless whine. "Thank goodness you are here. Your concierge is being incredibly difficult and aggressive with my family. And this crazy woman is blocking the ramp, harassing us and refusing to let us pass. We are your VIP guests today. We paid for a premium luxury experience. Please have security remove this woman from the dock immediately so we can finally get on our boat and start our vacation." Sloane stood at the bottom of the gangway with her chest puffed out and a sickly sweet smile plastered across her face. She held her manicured finger pointed directly at my chest, expecting Captain Sterling to instantly validate her victimhood. She waited for him to bark orders at Jamal, to apologize profusely for the delay, and to summon a security detail to drag me away from the marina. In her mind, the arrival of this distinguished, silver-haired white man in a crisp uniform signaled the absolute end of my resistance. Corinne leaned over the upper deck railing, her face glowing with renewed confidence. She adjusted her pearl necklace and nodded in agreement with her stepdaughter, completely ready to watch my public humiliation. She even threw a condescending smirk in my direction, silently telling me that my little rebellion was officially over. Devon, seeing that a senior authority figure had arrived, suddenly found his courage again. He stepped away from the edge of the dock and moved closer to the ramp, trying to position himself as the protective patriarch of his wealthy, inconvenienced family. But Captain Sterling did not react to Sloane's dramatic demands. He did not rush down the ramp with a panicked, apologetic expression. He descended the polished teak stairs with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a man who was entirely in control of his environment. The heavy soles of his pristine white shoes struck the wood with a steady, rhythmic thud that seemed to echo across the suddenly quiet harbor. The midday sun caught the gold epaulets on his shoulders, flashing brilliantly as he moved. He was a veteran of the sea, a man I had personally headhunted from a prestigious international cruise line 2 years ago because of his flawless operational record and his absolute unwavering discretion. I had taken a massive financial risk acquiring this specific yacht, and Sterling had been the one to help me overhaul its crew and operations to meet the elite standards of my brand. We had built a mutual respect grounded in relentless professionalism and trust. He knew exactly what it took to run a marine empire, and he knew that the screaming woman at the bottom of his ramp had contributed absolutely nothing to it. As Captain Sterling reached the main deck and stepped onto the wooden boarding ramp, Sloane took a step forward, ready to receive his apologies. She parted her lips, preparing to add another layer of fabricated complaints about how traumatizing this wait had been for her and her yoga instructor. She even smoothed down the front of her expensive linen dress, anticipating the moment the captain would recognize her inherent superiority. Captain Sterling walked right past her. He did not even spare her a single glance. He did not nod in her direction. He did not acknowledge her frantic pointing finger or her manufactured outrage. He walked past her as if she were nothing more than a minor gust of wind on the dock. The sickly sweet smile on Sloane's face instantly shattered. Her arm dropped to her side, her mouth falling open in a silent gasp of pure bewilderment. She spun around, staring at the back of the captain's uniform, completely unable to process the fact that she had just been entirely ignored by the very authority figure she thought was coming to save her. Corinne let out a sharp, offended noise from the upper deck. She gripped the teak railing, her eyes darting frantically between the Captain Sloane and the growing crowd of onlookers at the nearby seafood restaurant. The elite illusion she was so desperately trying to maintain was fraying at the seams. She opened her mouth to shout a demand to assert her status as a paying customer, but the absolute silence radiating from the captain forced the words back down her throat. Devon, completely misreading the situation, thought the captain simply had not heard Sloane over the ambient noise of the harbor. He assumed the man was just focused on assessing the security threat that I supposedly posed. Devon stepped forward, blocking the path at the bottom of the ramp, and puffed out his chest. He reached out his hand, attempting to initiate a firm masculine handshake to establish a rich guy camaraderie with the captain. Captain Devon started, his voice projecting a fake, booming confidence. "Thank you for coming down. We just need to get this sorted out so my family can get underway. I know you run a tight ship, so if we could just get this woman out of here and let my guests board, I would appreciate it." Captain Sterling did not slow his pace. He did not extend his hand to return the gesture. He looked right through Devon, his expression completely blank, and brushed past my husband so closely that the gold buttons of his uniform nearly clipped Devon's shoulder. Devon stumbled awkwardly, his outstretched hand hanging uselessly in the empty air. The flush of deep, burning embarrassment crept up his neck as a few patrons from the restaurant patio actually let out a low, collective gasp. The rejection was so blatant, so physically dismissive, that Devon physically shrank in upon himself. He retreated back to the edge of the concrete dock, his eyes wide with a sudden dawning terror. I was finally starting to realize that the dynamic on this pier was not what he thought it was. The tension in the air was so thick, it felt like trying to breathe underwater. Piper, the mistress, had completely abandoned her casual bored posture on the lower deck. She was standing rigidly against the fiberglass wall, her hands clutching her designer tote bag, looking like she wanted the earth to swallow her whole. The lavish sugar daddy-funded vacation she had been promised was rapidly turning into a bizarre and public humiliation. Jamal, my lead concierge, remained standing at his post at the top of the ramp. He watched the captain's descent with an expression of quiet, profound satisfaction. He held his biometric tablet securely, his posture unyielding. He had executed his role flawlessly, holding the line against my toxic in-laws without ever breaking his professional composure. Captain Sterling reached the bottom of the wooden ramp, his pristine white shoes finally making contact with the concrete dock. He walked with total purpose, leaving the bewildered, panicked forms of my in-laws scrambling in his wake. He stopped directly in front of me. He stood so close I could see the crisp, flawless stitching on his collar and the weathered, sun-kissed lines around his deep blue eyes. We were completely surrounded by a suffocating silence. The entire marina seemed to be holding its breath. The valets, the restaurant patrons, the passing tourists, and my toxic, deceitful family were all staring at us, waiting for the captain to unleash his authority and order me off the property. They waited for him to demand my identification. They waited for him to threaten me with police intervention. They waited for the ultimate validation of their cruel, elitist fantasy. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my shoulders relaxed, my chin held high. I did not break eye contact with Captain Sterling. The warm Miami breeze caught the edge of my linen trousers, the only movement in an otherwise completely frozen tableau. I let the silence stretch out for just a few seconds longer, allowing the sheer weight of the impending reality to hang suspended over the dock. The trap had been flawlessly set. The perpetrators had willingly walked right into the center of it, blinded by their own unchecked arrogance and their pathological need to make me feel small. And now the jaws of the trap were about to snap shut. I stood perfectly still as Captain Sterling stopped just inches away from me. The entire marina was trapped in a breathless vacuum of anticipation. My husband Devon was holding his breath. My mother-in-law Corinne was leaning over the upper railing with a triumphant smirk, fully expecting the captain to summon the harbor police to drag me away. My stepsister-in-law Sloane had her hands planted firmly on her hips, waiting for her elite status to be validated. Captain Sterling looked me directly in the eyes. He did not look at the angry white woman standing to his left. He did not look at the unemployed man cowering to his right. He brought his right hand to the brim of his pristine white cap and offered me a deep, highly respectful bow. When he spoke, his voice boomed across the concrete dock with the undeniable authority of a man who commanded the ocean. "Welcome aboard, owner," Captain Sterling announced. "Shall I have security remove these unauthorized guests from your private dock?" The words rang out with absolute devastating clarity. They hit the heavy, humid Miami air and expanded outward, striking my toxic in-laws with the force of a physical blow. For exactly 3 seconds, nobody moved. The universe simply stopped spinning. The collective delusion that my husband's family had spent years meticulously building shattered into a million irreparable pieces right there on the wooden gangway. The profound silence was suddenly broken by a sharp, violent sound from the lower deck of the yacht. Piper, the blonde yoga instructor, had dropped her crystal champagne flute. The expensive glass hit the polished fiberglass deck and exploded into fragments. The bright orange mimosa splashed across the pristine white surface, dripping slowly down the side of the hull. Piper did not even attempt to clean it up. She was staring at me with her eyes wide in absolute horror, her hands covering her mouth. On the dock, Sloane's arrogant posture completely collapsed. Her jaw literally dropped open. The smug, entitled smirk that she had worn like a crown for the last 6 years vanished entirely. She looked at Captain Sterling, then looked at me, and then looked back at the captain. Her brain was completely incapable of processing the reality unfolding in front of her. In her narrow, prejudiced worldview, it was mathematically impossible for a 35-year-old African-American woman to own a $15 million super yacht. She opened her mouth to speak, to demand a correction, but her vocal cords completely failed her. She just stood there gaping like a fish out of water. Up on the second deck, Corinne's reaction was even more severe. The woman who had just spent the last 20 minutes screaming insults at me, claiming I was a charity case who married her son for stability, looked as though all the blood had been violently drained from her body. Her skin turned a sickly ashen gray. She gripped the polished teak railing so desperately that her knuckles looked like they might burst through her skin. She swayed slightly on her feet, the realization hitting her that she had just mercilessly insulted the person who held the deed to the very boat she was standing on. And then there was Devon, my husband. The man who had stood by and let his family tear me to shreds just so he could secure a romantic getaway with his mistress. Devon looked like he had been struck by lightning. His eyes darted frantically between the captain and me. He was completely paralyzed, trapped between the fake wealthy persona he had projected to his family and the crushing, undeniable truth of his own pathetic reality. I did not give them a single moment to recover. I did not give them a chance to try and spin the narrative or formulate an excuse. I moved with calm, lethal precision. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between myself and Jamal. My lead concierge held his ground, his expression radiating a quiet, profound satisfaction as he witnessed my absolute vindication. He raised the secure biometric tablet, positioning the glowing screen perfectly at my chest level. I lifted my right hand and pressed my thumb firmly against the biometric scanner. A bright green light instantly flashed across the screen, illuminating the space between us. A crisp, automated voice chimed from the tablet, echoing loudly enough for my entire paralyzed family to hear. "Identity confirmed. Welcome back, Ms. Jada." The automated greeting sealed their fate permanently. There was no room left for denial. There was no room left for manipulation. The irrefutable digital proof of my ownership had just been broadcast across the marina. I slowly turned my head and looked directly at Devon. He was trembling. Actual visible tremors were shaking his shoulders. The man who had confidently told me to take an Uber home just 15 minutes ago was now visibly shrinking under the weight of my gaze. I let the silence hang there, watching them drown in their own humiliation. The patrons at the seafood restaurant were openly staring now, some of them whispering excitedly to their table mates. The marina valets, whom Sloane had treated like personal servants, were watching with barely concealed grins. I had spent years shrinking myself to make this family comfortable. I had hidden my success, downplayed my wealth, and tolerated their endless microaggressions just to keep the peace in my marriage. I had allowed them to believe I was small so they could feel big. But standing on that dock with the warm ocean breeze at my back and my multi-million-dollar fleet anchored behind me, I realized I was done playing small. I looked at Sloane, who was still frozen at the bottom of the ramp, her designer sunglasses slipping down the bridge of her nose. I looked at Corinne, who was clutching her pearl necklace like a lifeline. I looked at Piper, the mistress, who had thought she was scoring a free luxury vacation with a wealthy benefactor. And finally, I looked at Devon. The execution of my revenge was not going to be loud. It was not going to be chaotic. It was going to be an absolutely surgical dismantling of everything they held dear. They had wanted to mingle with the elite. They had wanted to experience true unfiltered power. And I was about to give them a front row seat to exactly what that power looked like when it was finally unleashed. I took another step forward, placing myself right at the base of the wooden gangway. I was no longer the outcast daughter-in-law blocking their path. I was the undisputed gatekeeper to the luxury they so desperately craved. The dynamic had completely inverted. They were now the trespassers standing on my property. Sloane finally found a fraction of her voice. She took a shaky step backward, her expensive resort dress fluttering around her legs. "Captain," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "There must be some kind of mistake. This is Jada. She is my stepbrother's wife. She books small fishing trips. She does not own this boat. My father is a very powerful man and we paid for this charter." Captain Sterling did not even blink. He looked at Sloane with an expression of complete indifference. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady and unwavering, "I am the captain of this vessel. I know exactly who signs my paychecks. Miss Jada is the sole proprietor and chief executive officer of Oceanic Elite Charters. You are currently standing on a private dock leased exclusively to her corporation." Sloane physically recoiled as if the captain had slapped her across the face. The reality was completely undeniable now. The authoritative confirmation from the captain stripped away her last desperate defense mechanism. The wealthy, powerful white man she had looked to for salvation had just publicly pledged his absolute loyalty to me. Up on the balcony, Corinne let out a quiet, strangled sob. The country club socialite who had just bragged about letting me into her exclusive circle was now facing the terrifying reality that she was entirely at my mercy. She had spent years biting the hand that fed her, and now she was realizing that the hand belonged to a titan. Devon tried to step forward. He reached out a trembling hand toward me, his eyes wide with a pathetic, desperate plea for salvation. "Jada," he whispered, his voice cracking horribly. "Jada, please, what is going on?" I looked at the man who had promised to love and protect me. I looked at the man who had conspired with his family to strand me on a concrete dock so he could sleep with his mistress in my stateroom. I felt absolutely nothing for him. No anger, no sadness, just a profound, liberating emptiness. The time for silent compliance was over. It was time to show them exactly what happens when you mistake a woman's grace for weakness. I pulled my shoulders back, lifted my chin, and prepared to drop the financial receipts that would completely obliterate their lives. Devon took a shaky step forward, his expensive leather shoes scraping awkwardly against the concrete dock. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. The crisp, automated voice from Jamal's tablet was still echoing in the humid Miami air, but Devon's brain was fiercely rejecting the information. He looked frantically at Captain Sterling, searching the older man's stoic face for a punchline. a hidden camera, anything to explain away the terrifying reality that was staring him right in the face. When Devon finally managed to speak, his voice cracked horribly, pitching up an octave into a pathetic, reedy squeak that made him sound like a frightened child. "What is he talking about?" Devon stammered, raising a trembling hand to point vaguely at the captain. "Owner. Jada, what kind of joke is this? You book small fishing trips. You run a customer service portal for tourists. You do not own a super yacht." I was clinging so desperately to the false narrative he had forced upon me. For years, I had deliberately kept my business operations vague when speaking to him, simply because any mention of my actual revenue sent him into a spiral of masculine insecurity. Whenever I tried to share a corporate victory, he would belittle it, changing the subject to his own mediocre career achievements. He had convinced himself and his entire toxic family that my long hours and late nights were spent doing low-level administrative work for a failing startup. He needed me to be small so he could feel big. And now the sheer, undeniable magnitude of his delusion was laid bare under the blazing Florida sun. I looked at the man who had just tried to banish me from my own property so he could sleep with his mistress in my master stateroom. I did not feel an ounce of pity for him. I let a cold, lethal professionalism coat every single word I spoke, adopting the exact tone I used when dismantling hostile corporate takeovers. My little startup. I began, my voice perfectly steady and carrying clearly across the quiet marina, is Oceanic Elite Charters. I paused, letting the name of the premier luxury maritime company in South Florida sink into his thick skull. I am the founder and sole chief executive officer. I do not book small fishing trips, Devon. I own this $15 million vessel. I raised my hand and gestured to the massive gleaming white superyacht towering behind me. And I own the 6 other luxury yachts currently docked in this marina. I watched his eyes dart wildly toward the line of identical majestic vessels moored along the exclusive VIP pier, all bearing the subtle, sophisticated crest of my company. The blood drained completely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. He staggered backward as if the physical weight of my net worth had just slammed directly into his chest. His arms fell limply to his sides. The realization that he had been sleeping next to a multimillionaire for years and had absolutely no idea was completely short-circuiting his mind. I did not let him recover. I immediately shifted my gaze upward to the second deck, locking eyes with my mother-in-law. Corinne was gripping the polished teak railing so tightly I thought she might splinter the wood. The arrogant country club persona she had wielded like a weapon just minutes ago had completely dissolved into sheer, unadulterated terror. She looked like a woman who had just realized she was standing on a trapdoor, and I was the one holding the lever. And since we are discussing elite status and wealth, I called out to her, ensuring my voice reached the wealthy patrons who had abandoned their meals at the nearby seafood restaurant to watch our confrontation. Let us talk about the $15,000 you so proudly bragged about paying for this trip. You called yourselves elite clients. You thought that money bought you the right to treat my staff like servants and treat me like an embarrassment to your family name. I took a slow, deliberate step up the wooden gangway. Jamal and Captain Sterling immediately flanked me, standing like loyal sentinels behind their actual boss. The $15,000 your family scraped together barely covers the cost of the premium marine fuel required to move this massive vessel out of the harbor, I stated, laying out the brutal financial math. It was a 90% friends and family discount. I let the percentage hang in the humid air, watching Corinne's eyes widen in absolute horror. I quietly authorized that massive discount in our corporate booking system out of respect for my marriage, I explained, making sure every single person on the dock understood exactly who the provider in this family actually was. Devon begged me to help him do something nice for your 40th anniversary because he knew he could not afford to do it himself. He pleaded with me to pull some strings with my company. The actual, full charter price for this specific luxury yacht is $150,000 for the week. Corinne let out a quiet, strangled gasp. Her knees visibly buckled, and she had to lean heavily against the fiberglass wall of the upper deck to keep from collapsing. The realization was absolutely crushing her. She had spent the last 6 years treating me like a charity case, constantly reminding me that I came from a working-class neighborhood, introducing me to her superficial friends as her son's little project. She had demanded that I be grateful. They allowed an African-American woman of my background into their exclusive wealthy circle. Now the undeniable truth was staring her right in the face. She was the charity case. Her entire family was the project, and their exclusive circle was being entirely subsidized by the very woman she had just tried to have thrown off the dock by security. Down at the bottom of the ramp, Sloane was shaking her head back and forth, her designer sunglasses slipping down the bridge of her nose. "No," Sloane muttered, her voice frantic and breathless. "No, that is impossible. You wear clothes off the rack. You drive a sensible sedan. You do not have $150,000 vacations to just hand out to people. You are lying. This has to be a lie." Her brain was completely malfunctioning. She could not comprehend that real wealth did not always look like loud, obnoxious brand logos and desperate social media posts. Real wealth was quiet. Real wealth was owning the entire marina while letting fools scream and embarrass themselves on the concrete dock. "I wear off-the-rack clothes because I invest my capital into appreciating assets." "Sloane," I replied coolly, looking down at my stepsister-in-law with nothing but pity. "Like the vessel you are currently desperately trying to board. You thought you were so clever crossing my name off the guest list so you could bring your brother's mistress on board. You crossed the owner off the manifest of her own ship." Sloane physically recoiled, taking a step closer to Devon as if seeking protection, but Devon was entirely useless. He was staring at the ground, breathing heavily, completely paralyzed by the exposure of his lies. The patrons on the restaurant patio were openly pointing at them now, whispering to each other about the fake rich family who had just been brutally exposed by the real billionaire. The silence that followed was incredibly satisfying. I watched them process the fact that their entire reality had been a carefully constructed illusion, an illusion that I had funded, maintained, and had now violently shattered. They had wanted to mingle with the elite. They had demanded a luxury experience, and I had just delivered the most premium, high-end reality check they would ever receive in their entire lives. The oppressive silence that followed my revelation about the actual cost of the charter wrapped around the dock like a suffocating blanket. I watched Corinne practically hyperventilate on the upper deck, her carefully manicured hands clutching the polished teak railing, as if it were the only thing keeping her from plummeting into the ocean. Down below, Sloane was staring at me with a blank, hollow expression, her brain entirely short-circuiting as the elite fantasy she had built her entire identity upon shattered into irreparable pieces. They were completely paralyzed by the exposure of their own profound insignificance. But I was not finished. The dismantling of their false empire had only just begun, and the main architect of my public humiliation had yet to face his reckoning. I slowly turned my attention away from the trembling women and locked my eyes directly onto Devon. My husband was standing near the edge of the concrete pier, trying his absolute hardest to make himself invisible. The arrogant, chest-puffing alpha male, who had confidently told me to take an Uber home just 20 minutes ago, was entirely gone. In his place stood a terrified, sweating imposter. The expensive linen shirt I had purchased for his birthday was now clinging to his back, soaked through with the cold sweat of impending doom. He saw the cold, calculated focus in my eyes, and he knew exactly what was coming. "And since we are airing out financial truths on the dock today," I announced, my voice slicing through the humid Miami air with lethal precision, "let us talk about your Porsche, Devon." Devon physically jolted, as if he had been struck by a live wire. His eyes widened in absolute horror, the whites glaring starkly against his dark skin. He reached out a trembling hand, his palm facing outward, in a silent, desperate plea for mercy. He shook his head in quick, frantic motions, silently begging me not to tear down the very last pillar of his fabricated masculinity in front of his mother, his stepsister, and the mistress he had brought along to impress. But Devon had shown me no mercy when he allowed his family to treat me like a stray dog on this very same dock. He had prioritized his own fragile ego over the vows he made to me, and now he was going to pay the ultimate price for his cowardice. I reached into the pocket of my trousers and pulled out my smartphone. I unlocked the screen with a swift, practiced motion and opened my secure corporate banking application. I navigated directly to the archives of our capital expenditures, the digital vault that held the undisputed truth of my financial dominance and his absolute dependency. I held the phone up the screen, glowing brightly in the afternoon sun, and took a slow, deliberate step toward the upper deck, where Corinne was still clinging to the railing. I made sure my voice projected clearly, ensuring that not only my in-laws heard every single syllable, but also the wealthy patrons dining on the adjacent restaurant patio who were currently hanging on to my every word. Devin has not had a job in 8 months. I declared the factual reality dropping like an anvil onto the pier. He did not resign to pursue better opportunities. He was fired for gross incompetence and chronic absenteeism. He has been waking up every morning putting on a tailored suit and pretending to drive to an office that terminated his employment before the holidays. A sharp collective gasp echoed from the restaurant patio. Corinne's jaw dropped open, her eyes darting from my face down to her son. Devin shrank inward, his shoulders rounding as he looked down at his expensive shoes, completely unable to defend himself against the undeniable truth. I kept my phone raised, tapping the screen once to bring up the specific transaction receipt. I looked right at Corinne, forcing her to confront the reality of the son she had placed on a pedestal while treating me like dirt. My corporate account paid off his luxury sports car in pure cash. I continued, my voice steady and unwavering. There was no massive corporate signing bonus. There was no phantom consulting gig. He begged me to clear his auto loan because he was terrified you would find out he was a complete failure. I transferred $110,000 of my hard-earned company revenue directly to the dealership to save him from the embarrassment of a repossession. Corinne looked as though all the air had been violently sucked out of her lungs. The country club socialite, who had just publicly humiliated me, claiming I married her son for stability, was now facing the soul-crushing reality that her golden child was a broke, unemployed fraud. I lowered my phone, but I did not lower my gaze. I stared directly into Corinne's horrified eyes, delivering the final devastating blow to her elitist illusions. I have been funding your son's entire lavish lifestyle while you look down your nose at me, I told her, my tone laced with absolute disgust. I paid for the designer suits he wears to your fancy country club dinners. I paid for the expensive anniversary gifts he handed you with a smile. I quietly subsidized your entire existence while you introduced me to your friends as a charity case. You thought you were letting me into your exclusive circle, Corinne. The truth is, I bought the circle, I own the circle, and you are only standing in it because I allowed it. The silence that followed was absolute and profound. The sheer weight of my financial receipts had completely flattened them. There was no argument they could make. There was no lie Devin could invent to spin the narrative in his favor. The digital proof was absolute and the public exposure was comprehensive. The surrounding marina guests, the actual elite individuals, my in-laws had been so desperate to impress, began whispering and pointing directly at Devin and Corinne. The words "fake rich" drifted over from the restaurant patio, spoken loudly enough for everyone on the dock to hear. In Miami, pretending to have money while living off someone else was the ultimate social crime, and my family was currently being convicted in the court of public opinion. Devin tried to shrink into himself even further, attempting to become completely invisible. The tall, broad-shouldered man who had aggressively grabbed my arm just 30 minutes ago was now a pathetic, trembling shell. His chest was caved in, his head bowed in absolute shame. The realization that his mother finally knew he was a failure was destroying him from the inside out. I watched Piper, the blonde yoga instructor, slowly step away from the edge of the lower deck. She looked down at Devin with an expression of pure, unadulterated revulsion. She had thought she was securing a romantic, luxurious week with a powerful executive who could elevate her lifestyle. Now she realized she was staring at an unemployed, broke liar who was completely dependent on the wife he was trying to cheat on. The transactional nature of their affair was laid bare, and Devin had just lost all his value. Piper took 2 large steps backward, physically distancing herself from the man she had been giggling with just an hour ago. Sloane was staring at the concrete, her designer sunglasses removed and clutched tightly in her hands. The stepsister, who had proudly declared I did not fit their demographic, was now processing the fact that she was currently standing in clothes paid for by my corporate account. The arrogance had been completely drained from her body, replaced by a sickening, terrifying vulnerability. They were stripped of their pride, stripped of their fake wealth, and stripped of the false narrative they had used to justify their cruelty toward me. I stood at the base of the gangway, flanked by Captain Sterling and Jamal, breathing in the sweet, salty air of the harbor. I had not needed to scream. I had not needed to cause a chaotic scene. I had simply turned on the lights and let them scatter like cockroaches under the glare of the truth. But I was not quite finished. They had conspired to replace me on my own vessel with a mistress, and that level of betrayal required a very specific type of consequence. I slowly turned my attention away from the shivering form of my mother-in-law and locked my eyes onto Piper. It was time to address the final member of this toxic party, and it was time to show Devin exactly what happens when you use my money to fund your infidelity. The absolute destruction of Devin's financial facade left the concrete dock steeped in a thick, paralyzing silence. I had just systematically stripped away every single lie my husband had used to prop himself up in front of his elitist family. But as I stood at the base of the wooden gangway flanked by Captain Sterling and Jamal, I knew my work was not quite finished. Devin and his mother had been dealt with, but there was still one more parasite feeding off my hard-earned empire who needed to be thoroughly aggressively exterminated. I slowly turned my attention away from the shivering form of my mother-in-law and locked my eyes directly onto Piper. The blonde yoga instructor was currently trying to inch her way backward toward the edge of the marina parking lot. Her platform sandals were scraping softly against the pavement as she attempted to make herself as small and inconspicuous as possible. She wanted to blend into the crowd of onlookers. She wanted to slip away into the humid Miami afternoon and pretend she was nothing more than an innocent victim who had been tragically duped by a broke, unemployed man. She had realized that Devin had zero wealth of his own, and instantly the romantic allure of their affair had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but the stark, ugly reality of her own poor choices. But I was not about to let the woman who had happily planned to sleep in my master's stateroom simply walk away without facing the bright, scorching spotlight she so desperately craved. Piper. I called out, my voice sharp and commanding, slicing through her pathetic attempt at a stealthy retreat. She froze instantly. Her shoulders hiked up to her ears, and she slowly turned her head to look at me. Her fake, bubbly resort persona was completely gone, replaced by the panicked expression of a cornered animal. She clutched her woven designer beach tote tightly against her chest as a makeshift shield. She opened her mouth, attempting to stammer out a defense, trying to play the naive outsider who had just been swept up in a messy family drama. I did not let her utter a single syllable of her fabricated innocence. I also know about the yoga studio rent. Devin has been paying for you, I announced, ensuring my voice carried clearly across the quiet harbor. Piper's jaw snapped shut. The remaining color drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking sickly and pale under the harsh Florida sun. She stared at me in absolute shock, completely unable to comprehend how I possessed that highly specific piece of information. You actually thought you had found yourself a wealthy, generous investor. Piper. I continued, taking a slow, measured step toward her. You thought Devin was a powerful executive who was deeply passionate about funding your little boutique wellness brand in downtown Miami. You thought the monthly wire transfers covering your commercial lease were the fruits of his highly successful corporate career. You happily accepted the expensive dinners, the designer handbags, and this fully paid luxury Caribbean vacation without ever questioning where the money was coming from. Piper shook her head weakly, taking another step backward. I did not know, she whispered, her voice trembling violently. I swear I did not know he was married to you. He told me he was single. He told me he was the CEO of an investment firm. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. He is an unemployed man who has been sleeping on my couch for 8 months, I corrected her firmly. And he did not pay your commercial lease with his money. He paid it with mine. I turned my gaze back to Devin, who was currently looking like he wanted the concrete dock to open up and swallow him whole. His hands were shaking violently at his sides and sweat was pouring down his forehead, stinging his eyes. He had known the revelation of his affair would end his marriage, But he had no idea the sheer magnitude of the financial trap he had blindly walked right into. You see, Devin thought he was incredibly clever, I said, addressing the crowd of onlookers, as much as my paralyzed in-laws. When I promoted him to a vice president role within Oceanic Elite Charters 3 years ago, I issued him a supplementary corporate credit card. It was meant to be used strictly for entertaining high-net-worth maritime clients and covering legitimate logistical business expenses. But Devin felt so insecure about out-earning him that he decided to use my corporate accounts as his own personal piggy bank to fund his secret double life. Devin raised a trembling hand, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull air into his lungs. "Jada, please," he gasped out, his voice cracking with pure terror. "Jada, I was going to put the money back. I swear to you, I was going to pay it all back. It was just a temporary loan to help her business get off the ground. I was making an investment." I stared at him with absolute unadulterated disgust. The sheer audacity of his lie was insulting to my intelligence. "I had my chief financial officer run a comprehensive emergency audit on your supplementary card late last night," I revealed, dropping the hammer directly onto his chest. "I saw a notification on your phone a few weeks ago that made me suspicious, and I do not ignore red flags in my business or in my home." My finance team worked through the night, pulling every single transaction, every wire transfer, and every fraudulent expense report you submitted over the last 6 months. I listed off his crimes, methodically watching his life completely unravel with every word I spoke. "You used corporate funds to pay $5,000 a month for Piper's commercial lease. You used corporate funds to buy the designer luggage she is currently holding. You even expensed the luxury resort wear she is wearing right now, categorizing it as marketing materials for a photo shoot that never existed. You spent over $40,000 of my company's operating capital to play sugar daddy to a woman who just dropped you the second she realized you were actually broke." Corinne let out a loud, dramatic wail from the upper deck of the yacht. The reality of what her son had done was finally piercing through her thick layer of elitist delusion. He was not just an unemployed failure. He had actively stolen from a multi-million-dollar enterprise. The country club socialite was now the mother of a common thief, and the social ruin she was about to face in her gated community was going to be absolutely spectacular. Devin fell to his knees on the concrete dock. The physical toll of his immense stress had completely overwhelmed his body. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, begging for a mercy he absolutely did not deserve. He pleaded with me to keep this between us, to handle it quietly as a marital dispute. He promised to sign whatever divorce papers I wanted, as long as I kept the financial audit a secret. I looked down at the man who had allowed his mother and stepsister to publicly humiliate me on this very pier. I looked at the man who had confidently told me to take an Uber home so he could sail away on my yacht with his mistress. "That is corporate embezzlement," I informed Devin coldly, my voice devoid of a single ounce of sympathy. The word hung in the air, heavy and devastating. It was not just a marital betrayal. It was not a simple mistake or a temporary lapse in judgment. It was a severe financial crime with severe federal consequences. "You did not just cheat on your wife, Devin." I continued, ensuring my tone was razor sharp. "You actively defrauded a registered corporation. You falsified expense reports to steal capital. You committed a felony." Devin buried his face in his hands, letting out a loud, pathetic sob. He knew exactly what that meant. He knew the extensive reach of my legal team, and he knew I possessed the endless financial resources required to bury him under a mountain of litigation he could never hope to escape. "My legal team has already drafted the paperwork to have you charged," I announced, sealing his absolute destruction. "The complete audit report, the fraudulent receipts, and the corresponding bank statements have already been compiled and sent to my lead corporate attorney. They are preparing to hand the entire file over to the authorities by the end of the business day. You are not just looking at a divorce, Devin. You are looking at federal prison time." Sloane stumbled backward, bumping hard against the side of the wooden boarding ramp. Her hands flew up to cover her mouth, her eyes wide with uncontainable shock. The arrogant stepsister who had proudly bragged about crossing my name off the guest list was now realizing she was related to a man facing severe criminal charges. The elite family image she guarded so fiercely had just been dragged through the mud and set entirely on fire. Up on the deck, Corinne was weeping openly now, the sound carrying over the gentle crashing of the harbor waves. She was gripping her pearl necklace so tightly the string looked ready to snap. Her golden child, the son she had placed on a pedestal while treating me like dirt, had completely destroyed his own life. And he had done it all using the money provided by the African-American woman she deemed unworthy of her exclusive circle. Piper did not wait to hear another word. The threat of being implicated in a corporate embezzlement scheme was the absolute final straw for her. She realized that the expensive gifts she had gladly accepted were purchased with stolen funds, and she wanted absolutely nothing to do with the criminal investigation that was about to rain down on Devon's head. She turned around, ignoring her dropped champagne glass, and began sprinting down the concrete pier, running as fast as her legs could carry her toward the marina exit. She completely abandoned the man who had ruined his entire life just to impress her. I stood perfectly still, watching the utter devastation I had wrought. The transformation of the dock was absolute. The arrogant, toxic parasites who had tried to discard me were now broken, sobbing, and facing total ruin. I had methodically dismantled their finances, their social standing, and their freedom. The scale of my victory was undeniable, and the profound silence of my highly trained crew standing behind me only magnified my absolute authority. The sound of Piper's platform sandals slapping against the concrete as she sprinted away toward the marina parking lot seemed to finally break the spell of absolute paralysis that had gripped my in-laws. The mistress had fled, abandoning the sinking ship of Devon's fabricated wealth, and her desperate retreat served as a glaring wake-up call for Corinne and Sloane. The reality of their total exposure was finally setting in. Corinne watched the blonde yoga instructor disappear around the corner of the luxury seafood restaurant. Then she slowly turned her head back to look at me standing on the wooden gangway of my $15 million super yacht. The arrogant country club matriarch who had just screamed that I was an embarrassment to her family name was completely gone. In her place stood a desperate, terrified woman who was watching her entire source of funding and her son's freedom evaporate into the humid Miami air. Corinne's face underwent a rapid, terrifying transformation. The harsh lines of her scowl melted away, replaced by wide, pleading eyes and a trembling lower lip. She forced hot, wet tears to well up and spill over her cheeks. She took a shaky step forward, leaving Devon kneeling and weeping on the concrete, and moved toward the base of the ramp. She reached out her arms, attempting to project a warm maternal energy that made my stomach turn. "Jada, sweetheart," Corinne sobbed, her voice cracking with heavily manufactured emotion. She stepped onto the bottom of the wooden ramp, holding her arms out wide, attempting to wrap me in a desperate embrace. "This is all just a terrible misunderstanding. We are family. You know we love you. We were just stressed about the trip, and the heat made everyone say things they did not mean. Please do not do this to us. Please do not do this to your husband. We can work this out privately." I did not let her hands make contact with my body. I took a sharp, deliberate step backward, moving further up the ramp and letting the physical distance speak for itself. Captain Sterling and Jamal immediately shifted their weight, subtly stepping closer to me to form a protective barrier against her sudden intrusion. "Do not touch me," I commanded, my voice echoing with absolute freezing authority across the quiet harbor. Corinne froze, her arms hanging awkwardly in the empty space between us. The fake tears continued to stream down her face, but the panic in her eyes was entirely real. Sloane suddenly snapped out of her catatonic state. The reality that her luxury vacation was actively being canceled finally registered in her superficial, highly filtered brain. She pushed past her weeping stepmother and rushed to the bottom of the ramp. She clasped her manicured hands together in a posture of desperate prayer, completely abandoning the elite persona she had wielded like a weapon just 30 minutes ago. "Jada, please," Sloane begged, her voice pitching into a frantic, shrill whine. "You cannot cancel this charter. You just cannot do this to me. I have already posted the entire 7-day itinerary to my 50,000 social media followers. I have major luxury brand deals riding on this yacht content. I promised my sponsors I would feature their designer swimwear on a private super yacht in the Caribbean. If we do not leave this dock today, I am going to lose thousands of dollars in sponsorships, and my engagement metrics will be completely ruined. Please, Jada, I will do whatever you want." I will stay out of your way the whole week. Just let us on the boat. I looked down at my stepsister-in-law with a mixture of profound disgust and absolute pity. Her brother was currently kneeling on the concrete dock facing federal embezzlement charges and potentially years in prison and all. Sloane could think about was her engagement metrics and her free designer swimwear. She was a hollow, empty shell of a human being, completely devoid of any real substance, loyalty, or basic human empathy. I looked at the three of them, the weeping mother, the panicking influencer, and the broken, cheating husband. They were a perfect portrait of toxic entitlement collapsing under the weight of its own greed. Your apologies are absolutely worthless to me, I told them, projecting my voice so every single wealthy patron watching from the restaurant patio could hear the final verdict. You are not sorry for treating me like a stray dog on this dock today. You are not sorry for conspiring to replace me with Devon's mistress on my own vessel. You are not sorry for the years of microaggressions, the constant belittling, and the endless attempts to make me feel small. I leveled my gaze directly at Corinne, making sure my words pierced straight through her fake tears and shattered whatever remaining hope she clung to. Your apologies are not for treating me poorly, Corinne, I stated, letting the cold, brutal truth wash over her. Your apologies are simply for realizing that you are completely broke and I am the bank. Corinne let out a quiet, choked sob, pressing her hands against her mouth. You are only crying because the automated teller machine just swallowed your card and locked you out of the vault permanently. I continued, ensuring she understood the permanence of this severing. You thought you could bite the hand that fed you because you assumed the hand was weak. You assumed my silence meant compliance. You assumed my patience meant stupidity. But my silence was simply me giving you the rope you needed to hang yourselves, and you all tied the knot perfectly. Devon looked up from the concrete, his face stained with tears and sweat. Jada, he rasped, his voice barely audible over the sound of the ocean waves. Jada, I will go to rehab. I will go to counseling. I will do whatever it takes to fix this. Just please do not call your lawyers. Please do not send me to prison. I will pay back the money, I promise. You do not have any money to pay me back, Devon, I reminded him coolly. You are an unemployed fraud who used my corporate capital to fund your delusions of grandeur. You stole from my company to sleep with another woman. You made your choices, and now you are going to experience the severe legal consequences of those choices. Sloane tried one last desperate tactic. She looked at Captain Sterling, hoping the older man might somehow intervene and show them mercy. Captain, please, Sloane whined, batting her eyelashes through her tears. You cannot let her do this to us. We have nowhere to go. We already checked out of our hotel. Captain Sterling did not even blink. He looked down at Sloane with an expression of complete professional indifference. Ma'am, he said, his voice steady and unwavering. I highly suggest you listen to the owner and step away from this ramp. My crew and I take our orders strictly from Miss Jada, and we are fully prepared to assist harbor security in your immediate removal if you continue to loiter on this private property. The absolute rejection from the captain sealed their fate. There was no savior coming to rescue them. There was no magical loophole they could exploit. The wealth and power they had tried to claim for themselves was standing at the top of the ramp, actively orchestrating their total destruction. Corinne dropped to her knees on the dock landing right next to Devon. The polished country club matriarch was now kneeling on dirty concrete, weeping openly in front of the entire marina. She reached out and grabbed Devon's arms, sobbing into his expensive linen shirt. They were a pathetic, miserable sight, but my heart remained completely encased in ice. I had spent 6 years trying to earn their respect. I had spent 6 years contorting myself to fit into their deeply flawed definition of family. I had funded their lives, paid their bills, and endured their relentless cruelty because I had desperately wanted to be loved. But standing on the deck of my flagship vessel, surrounded by my loyal crew and the empire I had built with my own 2 hands, I finally understood the truth. I did not need their love. I did not need their approval. And I certainly did not need their fake, groveling apologies. I only needed my peace, and I was willing to ruthlessly eradicate anyone who threatened it. I looked down at the weeping, broken family one last time. The begging phase had concluded, and it was time to execute the final devastating step of their eviction. I adjusted my posture, stood tall against the warm Miami breeze, and prepared to hand them the final documents that would officially sever them from my life and my fortune forever. I reached down to the designer duffel bag resting by my feet. It was the exact same bag that Sloane had so casually dropped her crumpled $100 bill onto just an hour ago when she thought she held all the power in the world. The sharp sound of the metal zipper opening seemed to echo loudly in the sudden tense silence that had fallen over the dock. I reached inside and my fingers closed around the thick, heavy manila envelope I had packed that very morning. It contained the culmination of my legal preparations, the ultimate consequence for a man who had profoundly mistaken my grace for weakness. I pulled the envelope out and took a deliberate step toward Devon. He was still on his knees on the concrete, his expensive linen shirt soaked with sweat and his shoulders shaking with absolute terror. He looked up at me, his red, tear-filled eyes begging for a mercy he had never once extended to me. I did not hand the envelope to him gently. I brought my arm back and slapped the thick stack of legal documents firmly against his chest. The sharp, striking sound made Corinne flinch violently from a few feet away. Devon gasped, his hands flying up reflexively to catch the envelope before it could slide down his shirt and hit the ground. He stared at the thick manila package as if it were a venomous snake about to strike him. "These are divorce papers," I announced, my voice completely devoid of the warmth and love he had spent the last 6 years taking entirely for granted. "I signed them this morning with my lead attorney before I drove to the marina. And because we share a highly documented corporate history, and because I have undeniable proof of your financial crimes against my company, my legal team filed an emergency injunction at the courthouse. They froze our joint accounts an hour ago." Devon let out a raw, guttural sound that was somewhere between a sob and a gasp for air. He gripped the envelope with trembling hands, the edges of the thick paper crumpling under his desperate hold. The absolute reality of his situation was finally crashing down on him with the force of a tidal wave. He had nothing. He had no job. He had no access to my massive corporate wealth. He did not even have access to the joint checking account he used to buy his daily expensive coffees. I looked down at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated ice. The locks on our Miami penthouse were changed by a private security firm. While we were standing on this dock, I informed him calmly, watching his eyes widen in fresh horror. "Your personal belongings, the ones you did not pack for this luxury vacation, have already been boxed up and shipped via freight directly to your mother's house. You have absolutely no legal right to step foot on my property ever again." I was entirely homeless, completely penniless, and facing a federal prosecution that would likely end with him serving a significant prison sentence. He had traded a multi-millionaire wife who loved him unconditionally for a mistress who was only using him for his stolen money. He had made his choices, and now he was drowning in the catastrophic consequences of his own arrogance. I turned my back on my weeping, soon-to-be ex-husband, and shifted my attention to Captain Sterling. The distinguished maritime veteran stood at attention, a flawless pillar of authority in his crisp white uniform. He had watched the entire dismantling of my toxic in-laws with a stoic professional grace, fully supporting the woman who signed his substantial paychecks. "Captain Sterling," I said, my tone shifting back into the polished, commanding cadence of a chief executive officer. "Please cancel the 90% friends and family discount I previously authorized for this booking in the corporate system." Captain Sterling offered a sharp, respectful nod. "Consider it done, owner," he replied, his booming voice carrying a tone of absolute finality. "The discounted rate has been officially revoked." I slowly turned my gaze back to Corinne and Sloane. The two women were standing together near the edge of the dock, clinging to each other like shipwreck survivors. The arrogant, elitist country club personas they had worn so proudly had been completely stripped away, leaving behind two terrified, deeply insecure women who were finally facing a power they could not manipulate or bully. "If any of you wish to board this vessel and continue your highly curated elite anniversary vacation," I announced, making sure my voice carried over to the restaurant patio, where dozens of wealthy patrons were now actively recording the scene on their smartphones. "You are more than welcome to do so. My crew is fully prepared to offer you the premium 5-star experience you demanded. You simply need to pay the remaining $135,000 balance. Right now, in full. I watched the astronomical number wash over them. Sloane let out a small, pathetic whimper, her hands flying up to cover her face. She could not even afford to pay the sales tax on that charter rate, let alone the actual balance. Corinne closed her eyes, tight lines of absolute defeat forming around her mouth. Tears of profound humiliation leaked through her eyelashes, ruining her expensive makeup. They were broke, they were exposed, and they were completely trapped under the glaring spotlight of public scrutiny. I raised my left arm and casually checked the face of my custom designer watch. The second hand was sweeping smoothly across the dark dial, ticking away the final moments of their presence in my life. I looked up, locking eyes with my mother-in-law one last time. "You have exactly 60 seconds to get off my private dock." I stated, my voice echoing with a lethal, uncompromising clarity. "If you are still standing on this concrete when that minute is up, I will have Jamal signal the harbor police to arrest all three of you for criminal trespassing." The countdown began immediately. I did not count aloud. The heavy, oppressive silence hanging over the marina did all the heavy lifting for me. At the 20-second mark, the tension finally snapped the weakest link in their toxic chain. Piper, the blonde yoga instructor who had been silently inching her way toward the parking lot ever since I exposed the corporate embezzlement, completely broke. The threat of imminent police involvement and federal fraud charges was the absolute final straw for her self-preservation instincts. She looked at Devin, the supposed wealthy benefactor, who was currently weeping on the dirty concrete clutching his divorce papers, and she made a rapid, entirely selfish calculation. Piper dropped her oversized designer sun hat onto the dock. She turned on her platform sandals, kicked off the high heels to move faster, and sprinted. She ran barefoot down the concrete pier, her expensive resort dress flapping wildly in the ocean wind. She did not look back at Devin. She did not say a single word of comfort to the man who had just destroyed his entire marriage and committed severe financial crimes to impress her. She abandoned him completely, fleeing the scene to save her own skin before the harbor police could arrive. Devin looked up just in time to see his mistress running away. He watched the woman he had risked my empire for disappear around the corner of the luxury seafood restaurant, leaving him entirely alone with the wreckage of his life. The poetic justice of his choices was absolute. He had chased an illusion of power and ended up with absolutely nothing. At the 40-second mark, Corinne scrambled into action. The country club matriarch was absolutely terrified of being placed in handcuffs and marched through a crowd of Miami elites. She grabbed Devin's shoulder, yanking him upward with a frantic, aggressive strength born of pure panic. She hissed at Sloane, commanding her stepdaughter to grab their heavy luggage before the police arrived. Sloane complied, her influencer arrogance completely broken and discarded. She stumbled over to the pile of oversized designer suitcases that she had haughtily ordered my valets to carry just an hour ago. Now, without my money or my staff to support her, she was forced to perform the manual labor herself. She struggled to drag the heavy bags across the uneven concrete, her face red and streaked with mascara, performing her walk of shame under the judging eyes of the entire marina. Devin stood up slowly, his movements stiff and uncoordinated. He clutched the manila envelope containing the divorce papers tightly against his chest, as if it were a physical shield. He looked at me one last time. His lips parted, and he tried to say my name, a final pathetic plea for the grace I had always freely given him. But the absolute freezing ice in my stare stopped the word dead in his throat. He looked into my eyes and finally realized that the woman he thought he could manipulate and control forever was entirely, irrevocably gone. They began their humiliating retreat. The three of them trudged down the long, sun-baked pier, dragging their heavy luggage behind them. Corinne was openly sobbing now, her sophisticated facade completely destroyed. Sloane was struggling with the bags, snapping irritably at Devin to help her, but Devin was walking like a hollowed-out zombie, completely unresponsive to his surroundings. I stood at the base of the wooden gangway, flanked by my loyal captain and my dedicated concierge, and I watched the toxic parasites who had drained my energy for 6 long years finally walk out of my life. I did not feel a single ounce of regret. I felt an overwhelming, brilliant surge of liberation. The heavy burden I had been carrying to keep them comfortable had finally been set down, and I was ready to step onto my ship and claim the empire I had built. I watched them drag their heavy luggage down the concrete pier for only a moment longer. The sight of their complete public humiliation was deeply satisfying, but I had a marine empire to run and a heavily subsidized luxury vacation to enjoy. I turned my back on the pathetic display of their retreat. I placed my hand on the polished teak railing of the gangway and began my ascent. The wood felt incredibly solid beneath my feet, a stark contrast to the shaky foundation my marriage had been built upon for the last 6 years. Jamal and Captain Sterling followed closely behind me, their presence a reassuring reminder of the absolute loyalty I had earned through hard work and mutual respect. As soon as my designer sandals touched the pristine main deck of my flagship vessel, Captain Sterling gave a swift, decisive nod to the deckhands standing by. The heavy hydraulic mechanisms immediately hummed to life. I stood near the edge of the deck and watched as the wooden boarding ramp slowly lifted away from the concrete dock, pulling up and folding neatly into the side of the hull. That simple mechanical action severed the final physical tie between my world and the toxic parasites I had just rightfully evicted. I walked straight to the aft deck, feeling the warm Florida sun on my skin. A steward in a crisp white uniform immediately approached me carrying a silver tray. Resting on the tray was a fresh crystal flute filled to the brim with premium vintage champagne. I took the glass, offering the steward a warm smile of gratitude, and leaned against the smooth fiberglass railing. Captain Sterling signaled the bridge, and the massive twin engines of the super yacht roared to life deep beneath my feet. The deep, vibrating rumble sent a thrill of absolute, undeniable power straight through my chest. The mooring lines were cast off, and the vessel slowly began to pull away from the VIP pier. I looked down the long expanse of the marina parking lot in the distance. Devin, Corinne, and Sloane had stopped their miserable trudge. The sheer weight of their luggage and the catastrophic reality of their situation had finally broken them. They were now actively screaming at each other right there in the parking lot. Even from a distance, I could see the furious, chaotic gestures. Corinne was swinging her designer handbag, hitting Devin squarely in the chest, blaming him for losing their ultimate meal ticket. Sloane had dropped her oversized suitcases onto the hot asphalt and was pacing frantically, holding her head in her hands. The blame game had fully commenced. They were tearing each other apart like a pack of starving wolves fighting over the last scrap of meat. I took a slow, luxurious sip of my champagne. The cold, crisp liquid tasted exactly like sweet, absolute victory. The coastal breeze whipped through my hair as the yacht navigated out of the harbor and into the brilliant blue expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. I did not look back at the dock again. I kept my eyes focused entirely on the beautiful, limitless horizon stretching out in front of me. 6 months have passed since that blazing afternoon in Miami, and the universe has a highly efficient way of balancing the scales. The divorce was finalized rapidly and with ruthless efficiency. Devin tried to contest the filings, of course, but his attempts were entirely laughable. Because I had instantly frozen our joint accounts, he had absolutely zero capital to hire a competent legal defense. I was forced to rely on a court-appointed mediator who took one look at our corporate financial records and advised him to surrender immediately. Devin walked away from our 6-year marriage with absolutely nothing but the clothes I had allowed him to pack. But a lack of alimony was the absolute least of his problems. My lead corporate attorney handed the comprehensive audit file over to the federal authorities exactly as I had promised. The evidence of his corporate embezzlement was completely undeniable. The fraudulent expense reports, the wire transfers for Piper's commercial lease, and the unauthorized luxury purchases were all meticulously documented. Devin is currently facing multiple counts of wire fraud and grand larceny. He is bankrupt, deeply in debt to his defense attorneys, and awaiting his criminal trial while sleeping on a cramped sofa in his mother's living room. Corinne's life collapsed with equal severity. Without my quiet monthly transfers, subsidizing her extravagant lifestyle, she defaulted on her mortgage within 90 days. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on her beautiful suburban home. The country club socialite, who had so proudly looked down her nose at my working-class background, was unceremoniously stripped of her memberships. Her wealthy elite friends completely abandoned her the moment the scandal surrounding Devon's criminal charges hit the local news circle. She is now renting a tiny two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, forced to share the cramped space with her unemployed felon of a son. Sloane faced a different but equally devastating kind of ruin. The influencers who build their entire brand on projecting an illusion of wealth fall the hardest when the truth is exposed. News of her humiliating eviction from my yacht spread rapidly through her social circles. The luxury swimwear brands she had promised to feature immediately dropped her sponsorships, citing a breach of contract. Her follower count plummeted as people realized her entire luxurious aesthetic was entirely funded by her black stepbrother's wife, whom she had treated appallingly. She was forced to take a minimum wage retail job just to afford her basic living expenses. While their lives burned to the ground, my empire only continued to expand. Oceanic elite charters experienced a massive surge in revenue during the fourth quarter. I acquired two of my largest regional competitors and doubled the size of my luxury fleet. I opened a new corporate headquarters overlooking the water and hired 30 new employees. The energy I used to waste, trying to make my toxic in-laws love me, was finally redirected back into my own ambition, and the results were absolutely staggering. Looking back at the years I spent shrinking myself, I realize now that being the family scapegoat was never about my lack of value. It was never about my clothes, my background, or my supposed obsession with my work. Their relentless cruelty was simply their reaction to my quiet, undeniable power. People who are deeply insecure cannot handle standing next to someone who glows with authentic self-made success. Devon needed me to be a small, silent, supporting character so he could pretend to be the leading man. Corinne needed me to be a charity case so she could feel superior about her proximity to white wealth. Sloane needed to belittle my business because her own life was entirely devoid of any real substance or achievement. They needed me to be weak so their fragile illusions of grandeur could survive. I spent so much time trying to prove my worth to people who were fundamentally committed to misunderstanding me. I tolerated their disrespect because society teaches women that keeping the peace is more important than protecting our own dignity. We are taught to swallow our pride, smile through the insults, and prioritize family harmony over our own mental health. But I am no longer shrinking to make toxic people comfortable in my presence. I refuse to diminish my light just because it hurts the eyes of those who insist on living in the dark. The moment I stopped seeking their validation was the exact moment I unlocked my true potential. I protected my peace, and in return, I gained the entire world. I built an empire with my own two hands, and I will never again allow anyone to stand on my deck and tell me I do not belong. True power does not require screaming or throwing tantrums on a concrete dock. True power is knowing exactly who you are, knowing exactly what you have built, and having the absolute courage to sail away from anyone who refuses to respect it. My husband's stepsister looked me up and down, sneered, and dropped a crumpled $100 bill onto my designer duffel bag. She announced to the entire marina that I did not belong on their elite family yacht trip, and that she had personally crossed my name off the guest list, replacing me with her blonde yoga instructor. When I looked at my husband expecting him to defend his wife, he simply adjusted his sunglasses, stared at the concrete dock, and told me to take an Uber home. They all turned their backs on me, ready to sail away into the Caribbean. What they did not know was that the uniformed captain marching down the pier was not coming to escort me off the property. He was coming to greet the true owner of the $15 million vessel they were desperately trying to board: me. Before I dive into exactly how I dismantled their entire world, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against toxic family members who severely underestimated your worth.